In 2025, Belgian archaeologists made a discovery so disturbing they questioned their own sanity. They found a human skeleton, but when they carbon dated it, the skull was Roman. The leg bones? Neolithic. Someone, 2,000 years ago, deliberately assembled a person from corpses that had been dead for 2,500 years, and we have absolutely no idea why. From a gladiator skeleton in England with lion teeth marks embedded in the bone, to a Greek temple that just proved Odysseus walked the earth as a real man, to an 11,000-year-old megalithic wall discovered underwater that Stone Age humans shouldn't have been able to build, to a 16th-century shipwreck preserved 2 miles down in conditions that should have destroyed it centuries ago. These are 10 archaeological finds from the last 18 months that authorities tried to bury, scientists refuse to explain, and history books will never mention. I'm about to show you evidence that will shatter everything you thought you knew about the ancient world. Let me know where in the world are you watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and please consider subscribing this channel to support. It genuinely helps me keep digging deeper. Now, let's expose the truth. From space, it looks like any other field in Hungary, a quiet patch of farmland swaying under the vast European sky. For centuries, farmers have worked this land, their plows passing just feet above a secret that's been waiting for 1,500 years. Because under the surface, beneath the roots of the crops, lies not just a piece of forgotten history, but an entire city of the dead, a ghost army. In April of 2025, archaeologists announced a discovery that sent shockwaves through the world of ancient history. On the outskirts of the Hungarian city of Tatabánya, they hadn't just found a grave, or even a dozen. They had potentially uncovered a massive, sprawling necropolis. An Avar-era cemetery so large it's estimated to hold hundreds, perhaps even as many as 1,000 warrior tombs. 1,000 graves. Just let that number sink in for a moment. An entire community, frozen in time, waiting for its story to be told. But who were these people? They're known as the Avars, one of history's most formidable and mysterious empires. For 250 years, from the mid-6th to the early 9th century, they were the supreme power in Central and Eastern Europe. A nomadic war machine that rode out of the vast Eurasian steppes, conquered the Carpathian Basin, and struck terror into the hearts of their neighbors, from the Franks in the west to the mighty Byzantine Empire in the east. They're famous among archaeologists for their stunningly intricate belt buckles and the legends of vast gold treasures buried with their chieftains. But they left behind no written records of their own. Their story has been told almost entirely by their enemies, the Byzantines and the Franks, who painted them as little more than terrifying barbarians. For centuries, the Avars have been a shadow in the pages of history, a ghost empire that rose, dominated, and then simply seemed to vanish. But this discovery at Tatabánya changes everything. 1,000 tombs offer 1,000 new chances to understand who these people really were. And what we're beginning to learn from these graves and others like them is that the truth about the Avars is far more complex and fascinating than the legends. It isn't just a story of warriors, but of families, not just of conquest, but of culture and survival. The question is no longer just what the Avars did, but who they were. And strangely enough, a field of 1,000 looted tombs is starting to give us the answer. This is what we found inside 1,000 of our warrior tombs. The story of this incredible find doesn't begin with a shovel, but with a satellite. It starts with a revolutionary Hungarian research project known as the Cemeteries from Space program. Led by the Hungarian National Museum, this initiative is turning the whole idea of archaeology on its head. Instead of archaeologists walking for months or years hoping to stumble on a clue, they're now scanning the entire country from orbit. The science behind it is both simple and brilliant. It's called crop mark analysis. When an ancient culture digs into the earth to make a ditch, a foundation, or in this case, a grave, they disturb the soil, changing its makeup forever. That disturbed soil holds and drains water differently than the untouched earth around it. Centuries, even millennia later, this difference has a subtle but visible effect on the crops growing on top. Where a deep grave was dug, the soil is looser and holds more moisture. The plants there get more water, allowing their roots to go deeper, causing them to grow just a little bit taller, denser, and greener than their neighbors. From the ground, you'd never notice it. But from a satellite or a high-altitude drone, these tiny variations in the plants create a pattern. They form ghostly outlines of what lies buried just beneath the surface. Archaeologists call these positive crop marks, and they're like X-rays of the past. Suddenly, entire buried settlements and cemeteries become visible as faint, geometric shapes in a field of wheat or barley. In April 2025, a researcher at the Hungarian National Museum named Attila Pop was looking at new satellite images of the fields near Tatabánya when he saw them. Faint, but unmistakable, regular, rectangular shapes. And not just a few, but hundreds upon hundreds laid out in neat rows. The sheer scale was breathtaking. This wasn't some small burial plot, this was a massive, organized cemetery. It was one of the largest Avar period cemeteries ever identified in Hungary. The team moved fast. They contacted the landowner, got permission to investigate, and, working with the local Tatabánya Museum, began a few small exploratory digs to confirm what the satellites were suggesting. They carefully picked two of the most promising crop marks and started to dig. What they found confirmed their wildest hopes. The graves were deep, a classic feature of the migration period. They were oriented from west to east, another common Avar practice. And as the team carefully cleared away the dirt, they found the fragile, dark remains of wood. These were log coffins, another hallmark of Avar burial rituals. The ghosts in the satellite pictures were real. They had found it. This technique is a complete game changer. Hungary's landscape is rich with history, but it's also covered by farms and modern towns that can hide or destroy ancient sites. Programs like Cemeteries from Space let archaeologists find and map these hidden sites on a massive scale, moving faster than development to make sure these irreplaceable links to our past can be studied and protected. In just one county, Fejér, this method has already helped pinpoint around 80 other potential sites waiting to be explored. The discovery at Tatabánya wasn't just a lucky break, it was the stunning proof that a new way of seeing the world, using the technology of the future to unlock the secrets of the past, actually works. The team had found the cemetery. Now they had to look inside. As the excavation at Tatabánya grew, a new and sobering reality began to sink in. Grave after grave was opened, but the treasures archaeologists might have expected, the gold, the weapons, the ornate belt fittings the Avars are famous for, were gone. The cemetery had been systematically and thoroughly plundered. But this wasn't the work of modern looters with metal detectors. The evidence pointed to something much, much older. This was an ancient crime scene. Inside the deep grave shafts, the archaeologists found the splintered remains of log coffins, tossed aside with a haste that speaks of a frantic search for valuables. The bones of the dead were often scattered, disturbed by hands that had reached into these graves more than 1,000 years ago. It was a scene of desecration, repeated across almost the entire city of the dead. For the archaeologists, that initial disappointment quickly turned into a new mystery. Who looted these graves, and when? The clues were sparse but fascinating. The most compelling evidence came from a strange and recurring discovery: burn marks. Underneath the broken coffin lids, the team frequently found layers of charring and ash. This wasn't cremation. The bodies themselves weren't burned. The burning happened inside the sealed grave, but on top of the coffin, after it had been covered with a little bit of earth, but before the grave shaft was completely filled in. Some researchers think this might have been part of the original funeral, a symbolic act of purification, or a fire to light the way to the afterlife. It's a ritual that has been seen in other Avar cemeteries. But there's another, more chilling possibility. The timing of the looting seems to have been key. The burn marks helped archaeologists estimate that the plundering likely happened when the heavy log coffins hadn't fully rotted away yet. The wood was still strong, meaning it would take real effort to break through. Could it be that the burning wasn't part of the funeral at all, but was an act of the grave robbers themselves? Perhaps it was a superstitious ritual to pacify the spirits of the warriors they were robbing. Or maybe it was more practical, a fire set to create light deep in the darkness of the 3-meter-deep graves. While the looters took the gold, they left behind something far more valuable to historians: the burial customs themselves. The Avars, like many ancient cultures, believed in a journey after death, and they prepared their dead for it. The use of log coffins is a huge cultural clue. Hollowing out a single massive tree trunk to entomb a person is an ancient tradition found all across prehistoric and early medieval Europe. For the Avars, we know from other sites that they preferred oak, a symbol of strength and endurance. These weren't just boxes, they were vessels built for eternity, carved from the most powerful trees in the forest. The consistent west to east orientation of the graves is another critical detail, likely tied to a belief system centered on the rising sun and the promise of rebirth. In some of our cemeteries, the graves were backfilled with animal skulls, usually from cattle or sheep, placed above the coffin, perhaps as offerings to protect or feed the deceased on their journey. So while the Tatabánya graves were emptied of their most spectacular artifacts, they were far from empty of information. The very way the tombs were built, their orientation, the choice of coffin, and even the act of their desecration all tell a story. They paint a picture of a people with a deeply held set of beliefs about life, death, and the world beyond. A world so real and so richly provisioned that it was worth robbing. The gold may be gone, but the ghost of the Avar belief system remains, waiting to be pieced back together from the shadows. Even a looted grave isn't truly empty. Scattered among the splintered wood and disturbed soil are the most personal artifacts of all, the bones of the dead. And within these fragments is a code, a biological manuscript that has survived for 1,500 years. Today, the science of archaeogenetics is letting us read that code. For a people like the Avars, who left no written history, this science is giving them a voice for the very first time. Groundbreaking studies on DNA from other Avar cemeteries have completely turned our understanding of their society upside down. While the genetic work at the new Tatabánya site is just getting started, the patterns found elsewhere give us an astonishingly clear blueprint of what to expect. And what they reveal is a society more structured, more complex, and more deeply rooted in family than anyone had ever imagined. What the DNA is telling us is that Avar society was built on a shockingly strict system. Lineage and inheritance were traced exclusively through the father's line. But it goes even deeper. The Avars also practiced something called patrilocality, a social system where men stayed in the community they were born into their entire lives, while women married into the community from the outside. Think about it. A village, or a group of villages, where for centuries the men are all direct descendants of a single founding father, or a small group of related men. Generation after generation, sons stay put, while their daughters leave to marry into other Avar communities. In turn, their wives arrive from somewhere else, bringing new genetic lines with them. This practice, known as female exogamy, was the very glue that held the Avar Empire together. It created a huge network of social and genetic alliances, connecting communities across the entire Carpathian Basin. The DNA shows that these incoming women, while from different communities, all shared a common steppe ancestry, which means the Avars were not marrying the local people they conquered, but were keeping their population cohesive across their entire territory.
The level of detail scientists can now reconstruct is just staggering. By sampling hundreds of people from a single cemetery, researchers have been able to map out entire family trees, some spanning up to 9 generations and connecting nearly 300 people. We can literally see a founding father, his sons, his grandsons, and his great-grandsons, all buried in the same community cemetery over 250 years. We can see which men had children with which women and how those family lines branched out over time. This genetic tapestry also reveals more intimate details. The data shows that high-ranking men often had more than one partner. We also see evidence of levirate unions, where a man would marry his dead brother's widow to keep his brother's family line going. These practices, all designed to preserve the father's lineage, are classic hallmarks of many ancient Eurasian steppe societies. But even with these complex relationships, the studies have found no evidence of marriage between close blood relatives, which suggests the Avars were keeping meticulous track of their ancestry over many generations. This isn't just a family tree, it's a political diagram. This rigid social structure was the source of Avar strength. It ensured stability, reinforced the power of elite families, and allowed them to maintain their unique cultural identity for centuries, even after they gave up their nomadic lifestyle. Even more remarkably, the DNA can reveal moments of political chaos. In one cemetery, researchers found a dramatic shift in the mid-7th century. The main male lineage that had dominated the community for generations suddenly vanished, and was replaced by a new, completely unrelated male lineage. This genetic takeover happened at the same time as changes in the archaeological record, shifts in diet and burial styles, pointing to a political coup where one ruling elite was violently replaced by another. This is history, written in the human genome. It's a level of insight we could never get from chronicles written by their enemies. The ghost army of Tatabánya, though its worldly treasures are gone, carries within its very bones the authentic, unwritten story of the Avar people, a story of family, dynasty, and power.
The graves at Tatabánya might have been emptied by looters, but they aren't a complete mystery. Thanks to over 100,000 Avar graves excavated across Hungary over the years, we have a vivid picture of the magnificent artifacts that once filled these tombs. By looking at what was found in undisturbed burials, we can reconstruct what the Tatabánya warriors would have taken with them into the afterlife. And in doing so, we can piece together the society they built. First and foremost, the Avars were warriors. Their military skill is the stuff of legend, and their graves reflect that. While a typical warrior burial often had spears and bows, the ultimate status symbol was the saber. Recently, near the city of Székesfehérvár, another cemetery found by the Cemeteries from Space program yielded an extraordinary find: a rare Avar period saber, the first of its kind found in that region in nearly 50 years. Sabers weren't common weapons. Finding one in a grave means the deceased was a person of high rank, an elite warrior. These curved blades were an innovation of the steppe nomads, perfectly designed for fighting on horseback. The Avar saber was a fearsome weapon, a symbol of the horsemanship and military genius that let them dominate Central Europe. They were also masters of armored warfare. In another incredible discovery near Debrecen, archaeologists unearthed the tomb of a 7th century warrior buried with a complete suit of lamellar armor. This armor, made of hundreds of small overlapping iron plates stitched together, was the equipment of the Avar heavy cavalry. Finding a complete suit is exceptionally rare. This find lets us see exactly how these elite warriors protected themselves in battle. Many elite burials also included the warrior's horse, often sacrificed and placed right in the grave. a powerful testament to the bond between the Avar warrior and his mount. But Avar society wasn't just about war. It was also about displaying status, in life and in death. The artifacts from their graves speak to a deeply layered society with a rich and powerful ruling class. One of the most iconic Avar artifacts is the belt. An Avar warrior's belt was more than just a piece of clothing. It was his resume, his biography, and his bank account all rolled into one. Lavishly decorated with cast bronze and sometimes gold-plated fittings, these belts showed a man's rank, his accomplishments, and his wealth. The artistry of the metalwork is just astonishing.
The graves of high-status women were just as rich. Archaeologists have found beautiful gilded bronze hair ornaments, intricate earrings, and necklaces made of vibrant glass beads. These weren't just personal decorations, they were markers of family wealth and social standing. What's more, the grave goods show that the Avars were not an isolated people. They were deeply connected to the wider world through trade, diplomacy, and war. At a site near Szeged, excavations uncovered artifacts from abroad, including beautiful golden earrings and, remarkably, a small Byzantine bell. These objects are clear evidence of the complex relationship the Avars had with the Byzantine Empire. At times, they were enemies, laying siege to Constantinople itself in 626. At other times, they were trading partners, or even mercenaries, getting enormous tribute payments of gold and silver from the Byzantines in exchange for peace. This flood of Byzantine gold fueled the Avar economy and gave their own master goldsmiths the raw material to create objects of breathtaking beauty. So when we look at the 1,000 empty graves at Tatabánya, we have to use our imagination. We have to mentally refill them. We have to see the elite warriors, dressed in iron lamellar armor, their curved sabers at their sides. We have to see their ornate belts, glittering with gilded bronze. We have to see the mobile women, adorned with Byzantine-style gold earrings and colorful beads. And we have to see their prized horses, joining them in the afterlife. Though physically gone, these lost treasures tell the story of a society that valued military power, celebrated status and wealth, and was a major player on the world stage of the early Middle Ages. The story of the Avars isn't static, it's a story of adaptation and transformation. When they first thundered into the Carpathian Basin in 567, they were a nomadic people, a confederation of mounted warriors from the Eurasian steppe. Their whole society was built for mobility, for raiding, and for conquest. They were the latest in a long line of steppe empires to push west, and, like the Huns before them, their arrival completely reshaped the political map of Europe.
In an alliance with the Lombards, they crushed the kingdom of the Gepids and established their own Khaganate, a realm that at its peak stretched across modern-day Hungary, Austria, Romania, and the Balkans. For decades, their main way of dealing with their settled neighbors, especially the wealthy Byzantine Empire, was extortion and war. They raided deep into Byzantine territory, sacking cities and demanding massive payments of gold to keep the peace. This all came to a head in the legendary joint Avar-Sassanid siege of Constantinople in 626, the high watermark of their military power. But the siege failed. That defeat was a critical turning point. The failure to capture the immense wealth of the Byzantine capital, combined with revolts by some of their Slavic subjects, forced the Avars to change their strategy. The old model of a purely nomadic empire funded by raiding and tribute just wasn't sustainable anymore. The Avars had to adapt, or they would vanish. And they did. The archaeological evidence clearly shows that in the decades after the early 7th century, the Avars began a profound transformation. They shifted from being nomads to becoming a settled agricultural society. They established permanent settlements on the fertile plains of Hungary, many of which would be lived in for centuries. We can see this shift in the ground. Large, organized cemeteries, like the one at Tatabánya, appear, a clear sign of a population that's no longer on the move. Analysis of their bones shows a change in their diet towards agriculture. This transformation was the secret to their long-term success.
While other nomadic empires often collapsed as quickly as they appeared, the Avars survived in the heart of Europe for over 250 years. They became a stable and powerful political force, a bridge between the nomadic world of the steppe and the settled kingdoms of medieval Europe.
But maybe the most remarkable thing about this transformation is what didn't change. As they settled down and started farming, you would expect their unique social structure to dissolve as they mixed with local people. But the DNA evidence tells us the exact opposite happened. They held on to their core identity with incredible tenacity. Even in their new permanent villages, they kept practicing their strict patrilineal kinship and female exogamy. They maintained the very social system that had bound them together on the steppes. This is what allowed them to preserve their political unity and cultural identity, even as their entire economic foundation was changing right under their feet. The Avars proved to be masters of adaptation. They weren't just a destructive horde that burned brightly and then faded away. They were a dynamic and resilient people who successfully navigated one of the most difficult transitions a society can make. They built a stable, long-lasting kingdom in a foreign land by blending their ancestral traditions with new economic realities. This story of a warrior people learning to become farmers, of a nomadic empire putting down roots, is perhaps the most surprising and important discovery of all. It transforms the Avars from a simple footnote about barbarian invaders into a complex and fascinating case study of cultural survival. So we return to where we began, a quiet field in Hungary, marked by the ghostly outlines of 1,000 graves. The discovery at Tatabánya is a landmark, not just for its incredible scale, but for what it represents. It's a testament to a new age of archaeology, where the view from space can reveal a city of the dead, and the secrets of an empire can be decoded from a single fragment of bone.
For centuries, the Avars were defined by others. They were the terrifying horsemen in the chronicles of their enemies, their own story lost to time. But now, they're finally beginning to speak for themselves. The 1,000 graves at Tatabánya and the countless others being found across the region are like a book with 1,000 pages, written in a language of earth, bone, and artifacts. From these graves, a new image of the Avars is emerging. We see them not as a faceless horde, but as families, bound by intricate kinship networks that held their realm together for generations. We see the evidence of their power, the rare sabers and suits of armor, but also of their artistry and their connection to the wider world, reflected in gilded ornaments and Byzantine gold. Most of all, we see their incredible resilience, their ability to transform themselves from nomadic conquerors into the settled masters of a European kingdom, all without losing the core of who they were. The work at Tatabánya has just begun. The soil still holds countless secrets. What new details of their lives will be revealed as the excavations continue? What stories will the DNA of these 1,000 warriors and their families tell? The Avars, once a mystery, are stepping out of the shadows. The ghost army is finally being counted, and their long silent voices are, at last, being heard. The story of early medieval Europe will never be the same. On the remote, wind-swept shores of Norway's Senja Island, a landscape of dramatic peaks and deep, cold fjords that has guarded its secrets for centuries, a stunning discovery has emerged from the earth. It's a story that lay hidden for over 1,000 years, a story not of a famous king or warrior, but of a powerful Viking woman and her loyal dog. This isn't just the discovery of a grave, it's the unearthing of a forgotten world, a rare and intimate glimpse into the life of an elite figure on the Viking frontier, a woman whose story is now, finally, being told. On a quiet field in the small village of Sand, Overlooking the vast Melungen Fjord, a chance discovery has unearthed a 1,100-year-old secret. Just 20 centimeters below the surface, a place so shallow it could have been destroyed by a farmer's plow at any moment, metal detectors screamed, signaling something extraordinary lay just beneath. What a pair of amateur treasure hunters pulled from the soil were not mere trinkets, but two intricately decorated bronze brooches, the kind used to fasten the formal dress of a high-status Viking woman. And with them, something more startling: human rib bones. They had stumbled upon the grave of a powerful Viking woman, buried in a boat with her faithful dog by her side. But who was this mysterious figure, and what can her remarkable burial tell us about the forgotten women of the Viking frontier? This is the story of an archaeological detective case, where each artifact is a clue, and each clue brings us closer to a woman who has been silent for a millennium. The story begins not with archaeologists and careful grid lines, but in 2023 with two men and their metal detectors, scanning a low beach ridge on Senja Island. It's a common hobby, but on this day, the familiar beep was different. It led them to dig a small, careful hole where they uncovered the first pieces of the puzzle: two bronze, bowl-shaped oval brooches. Instantly, they knew. These weren't just any pieces of metal. They were iconic artifacts of the Viking Age, the specific type of jewelry worn by Norse women of considerable standing.
The presence of rib bones right there with the jewelry confirmed it. This was a burial. Realizing the gravity of their find, they did exactly the right thing and alerted the local authorities. In Norway, such cultural artifacts are protected by law, and their responsible actions set in motion a series of events that would bring a team of archaeologists from the Arctic University Museum of Norway to this unassuming field. The initial find was compelling, but the situation quickly became more urgent. The landowner filed for a permit to expand a nearby garage, a construction project that would have certainly destroyed the newly discovered site. The state stepped in, covering the costs and commissioning a full-scale excavation. In May of 2025, the team, led by archaeologist Anja Rothnieni, arrived on site. They were ready to peel back the thin layer of soil, not knowing they were about to uncover the very first boat grave ever discovered on Senja, a find that would add a vital new chapter to the history of this remote northern region. As the archaeologists began their meticulous work, the full picture started to emerge. Carefully scraping away the topsoil, they didn't find the solid wood of a ship, but something far more ethereal. In the light-colored sand of the subsoil, a dark, clear outline began to take shape. It was the unmistakable imprint of a boat, its wooden structure having completely decomposed over the centuries, leaving behind a ghostly stain in the earth. This ghost ship measured about 5.4 meters, or 18 feet, in length. This wasn't a mighty longship of war, but a smaller, more practical vessel. The team quickly realized they were dealing with a very specific and rare type of construction. There were no iron rivets, the metal nails that famously held together the clinker-built longships like the Oseberg and Gokstad. Instead, this boat appeared to have been sewn together, a technique where planks were joined using organic materials like animal sinews. This sewn boat tradition was common in northern Norway, but it's a rare find because the organic bindings decay so easily, often leaving nothing behind. It's only thanks to modern excavation techniques that we're now able to spot these subtle traces.
This vessel was likely a carve, a type of boat with a broad hull used for coastal fishing, transport, and travel along the fjords, a versatile workhorse of the northern seas. Burying someone in a boat was a significant honor, a practice reserved for maybe 1 or 2 individuals per generation in a community, signaling high local status. It was a powerful symbol in Norse culture, representing the final journey to the afterlife. Lying just 20 to 30 centimeters below the surface, this grave had miraculously survived for 11 centuries, a fragile time capsule resting just inches from the modern world. And inside the faint outline of this ghost ship, the archaeologists found its passengers.
Lying roughly in the middle of the boat's imprint was a skeleton, placed on its side with knees bent. Though the bones were poorly preserved, some parts were in surprisingly good condition. The ribs and other bones that had been in direct contact with the bronze brooches were well preserved. You see, the copper alloys in the bronze have antibacterial properties, which had leached into the surrounding bone, effectively acting as a preservative. Based on the grave goods, the team immediately knew the deceased was a woman. The two magnificent oval brooches found on her chest were the primary clue, used to fasten the shoulder straps of a pinafore-style dress known as a smocker. But these were not ordinary brooches. They were a more refined variety, intricately decorated and trimmed with delicate silver thread. This detail elevated them from simple fasteners to clear symbols of wealth and status, likely crafted not by a local artisan, but by a professional in an urban center to the south and acquired through trade. It tells us that this woman, living on the remote northern frontier, was connected to the wider Viking world. As the team continued to excavate, more clues to her identity emerged. Near her skull, they found a metal ring-shaped pendant and what appear to be two disc-shaped beads, which may have been part of a necklace. Each item was another piece of the puzzle. These personal adornments were more than just decoration. They were a statement of identity, communicating her standing, her wealth, and her connection to Norse cultural traditions. The archaeologists concluded that while she wasn't a queen on the scale of the Oseberg burial, she was undeniably an elite figure, a woman of significant importance with considerable influence, perhaps the mistress of a large farm, and one of the most respected people on this northern edge of the Viking world.
As the delicate process of uncovering the woman's remains continued, the archaeologists made another, deeply moving discovery. At her feet, nestled within the hull of the boat, lay the complete skeleton of a small dog. This wasn't a haphazard inclusion. The animal had been placed with obvious and deliberate care, adding a profoundly personal and humanizing touch to the burial. Animal burials are a known feature of Viking-age graves. Horses, in particular, are often found and are thought to represent wealth and transport to the afterlife. The famous Oseberg ship burial, for instance, contained the remains of 15 horses and 4 dogs. But the dog in the Senja grave feels different. While dogs are found in other graves, their inclusion here speaks to a different kind of relationship. In Norse mythology, dogs sometimes appear as guardians to the underworld. So, one interpretation is that the dog was a spiritual protector. However, the careful placement here suggests something more personal. Archaeologists believe it was likely a cherished pet, a loyal companion in life chosen to accompany its owner in death. This provides tangible proof of the deep emotional bonds that Viking sagas sometimes describe people having with their dogs. The dog was likely killed at the time of the funeral to be buried alongside its owner. While it seems brutal to us, it was intended as an act of honor, ensuring the beloved companion would continue to serve and comfort its mistress on her journey into the unknown. The discovery transforms the grave from a mere archaeological site into a poignant tableau of love and loyalty that transcends time. Beyond the jewelry and the loyal companion, the grave contained another set of artifacts that give us the most profound insights into who this woman was. These were not symbols of passive wealth, but the tools of an active and powerful manager. Among the grave goods, archaeologists identified several items linked to farming and harvesting, including what looks like an iron sickle.
Even more revealing were the textile tools. The team found a spindle whorl for spinning wool into yarn, and a long, flat object made from whalebone. Though it's poorly preserved, it's believed to be a weaving sword, a tool used to beat weft threads tightly on a loom. The presence of these tools is incredibly significant. In Viking society, textile production wasn't just a chore. It was a vital economic activity and a source of considerable power for women. The lady of the household, the husfreyja, was responsible for overseeing all of it.
A single woolen sail for a longship could take an entire household years to produce. Because of this, textile tools in a woman's grave are a huge indicator of high status. They tell us she wasn't just a laborer, but a manager, the head of a complex and crucial production enterprise. When the men were away trading, fishing, or raiding, it was women like her who ran the farms and held things together. They held considerable independence and authority. The grave goods of the Senja woman perfectly align with this picture. The agricultural tools speak to her role managing the land, while the textile tools point to her authority over a vital industry. She was a powerful figure, the mistress of her farm, and a cornerstone of her community's economy. This paints a portrait of a woman who held real, tangible power all her own. To truly understand this discovery, we have to zoom out and look at the world this woman inhabited. Around 900 to 950 CE, when this grave was made, Senja Island was the northern frontier of the Viking world. This region was known as Hålogaland, a land of powerful chieftains who controlled the valuable trade routes stretching further north.
Life here was shaped by the sea. The farm this woman likely managed would have kept livestock and grown what crops the short summer would allow, but their prosperity was tied to the ocean. The location was strategic for fishing and maritime trade, connecting them to a vast network that stretched across Scandinavia and beyond. We see that connection in her brooches, luxury items imported from the south. This was a society built on self-reliance. The Icelandic sagas, our main literary source for the Viking Age, mostly focus on events elsewhere, leaving regions like Hålogaland in relative shadow. That's what makes discoveries like this so precious. They are our most direct window into the lives of the people who actually lived here. The discovery of a boat burial itself is a testament to their maritime culture, but the fact that it was a sewn boat is particularly telling. This older technology was perfectly suited to the northern landscape, creating lighter, more flexible boats. Finding the first of its kind on Senja confirms this ancient boat-building tradition persisted here deep into the Viking Age. This woman wasn't living in a forgotten backwater. She was part of a dynamic and strategic region at the forefront of Viking expansion and trade. So, after all the clues have been gathered, who was the Viking woman of Senja Island? The evidence tells us she was a woman of high status, but her power was local and deeply rooted in her community. The boat burial itself is the first clue, an honor reserved for the elite. Yet the boat was a practical coastal vessel, not a grand warship, suggesting she was a prominent local figure, perhaps the matriarch of a powerful clan that controlled this stretch of coast. Her brooches, trimmed with silver and imported from the south, speak of wealth and connection. But her identity wasn't just defined by what she owned. It was defined by what she did. The textile tools and farming implements are the key. She was the mistress of the household, a manager who oversaw the production of essential goods. This role gave her significant authority, making her indispensable. She was a woman of substance and skill, a leader in both the domestic and economic spheres. In a society where men were often away, she was the anchor. Her power wasn't borrowed from a husband, it was earned. And finally, there is the dog. This small creature, placed so carefully at her feet, reveals a personal, emotional side that artifacts alone cannot. It tells us she was a person capable of deep affection, whose life included the simple joy of animal companionship. It humanizes her, bridging the 1,100-year gap. Putting it all together, the Senja woman emerges from the mists of time, an elite matriarch on the Viking frontier, a skilled manager, a respected community leader, and a loving dog owner. The excavation on Senja Island may be complete for now, but the process of discovery has only just begun. The grave was incredibly fragile, so the archaeologists lifted many of the finds, including the delicate bones, by taking them out in large blocks of the surrounding soil. Now, the work moves from the field to the lab. Under controlled conditions, conservators will painstakingly clean and stabilize each artifact.
The skeletons of both the woman and her dog hold a wealth of information waiting to be unlocked. Scientific analysis will hopefully confirm her sex, determine her age, and reveal details about her health and diet. It could even tell us if she grew up in the Senja region or migrated there from somewhere else. The dog skeleton will be studied to identify its type and age, giving us a clearer picture of this loyal companion. And the site itself may have more secrets. Just a few meters from the boat grave, the team found another, single oval brooch. This strongly suggests the presence of another grave. Archaeologists hope to return with ground-penetrating radar to survey the area. It's possible this wasn't an isolated burial, but part of a larger, unknown Viking Age cemetery. The story of the Senja woman might just be the first chapter of a much larger saga waiting to be unearthed.
The discovery on Senja Island is more than just a landmark find. It has given us a person. In the male-dominated sagas of warriors and kings that so often define the Viking Age, the story of the Senja woman stands out as a powerful testament to the crucial, authoritative roles that women held. We see a woman of high status, recognized not for her wealth alone, but for her skills as a manager and producer. The combination of an elite boat burial, the tools of her trade, and the deeply personal inclusion of her dog provides a multifaceted and profoundly human view of life in northern Norway 1100 years ago. The woman of Senja has been silent for a millennium. Now, thanks to a chance discovery and the careful work of archaeologists, she speaks again. Her legacy is no longer just an outline in the sand, but a vivid portrait of power, production, and companionship at the edge of the Viking world. And as the research continues, one question lingers. How many more stories like hers are still out there, waiting just beneath the surface, ready to change everything we thought we knew about the past? The story doesn't begin with archaeologists, but with the French Navy. In March 2025, a specialized unit was running a routine military survey off the stunning coast of Saint-Tropez. Their mission was entirely modern, to map deep-sea resources, from valuable minerals to the critical subsea cables that power our digital world. They were using an autonomous underwater drone, a robotic marvel gliding silently through the abyss, painting a picture of the seafloor with sonar. And then an anomaly appeared on their screens. A shape materialized that was too big, too symmetrical to be a trick of geology. Intrigued, the crew broke from their mission. They sent the drone back down, this time with its high-resolution cameras rolling. What swam into view through the murky blackness was something no one on that ship was prepared for. It wasn't a rock. It was the unmistakable outline of a ship. The discovery was as accidental as it was profound. The Navy team, from the expert unit known as Cephismir, knew right away they'd stumbled onto something big. They alerted the proper authorities, handing their stunning images over to DRSM, the French Ministry of Culture's Department of Underwater and Submarine Archaeological Research, the official guardians of France's submerged heritage. For the archaeologists at DRSM, this was the call of a lifetime. A historic shipwreck is always exciting, but the early data hinted that this one was different. The depth was simply staggering. The wreck, now officially named Camarat 4 after the nearby Cap Camarat headland, rests an astonishing 2,567 meters below the surface. That's over 8,400 feet, more than a mile and a half straight down. To put that in perspective, the pressure there is over 250 times greater than at the surface. It's a force so immense it would instantly implode most submarines and crush a human out of existence. This is a realm of perpetual night, where sunlight has never penetrated, and the temperature is just a few degrees above freezing. It's one of the most hostile environments on Earth. And it's this very hostility that made Camarat 4 the perfect time capsule. In shallower waters, shipwrecks are torn apart. Currents rip them to shreds, waves grind them against the seabed,
and marine organisms, from shipworms to bacteria, devour their wooden hulls. They're also vulnerable to us, from damage by fishing trawlers to outright looting by treasure hunters. For centuries, this has been the fate of countless historical vessels, leaving archaeologists with scattered fragments. But the deep sea is another world. At 2,567 meters, the Camarat 4 is safe from all of that. The crushing pressure, the frigid cold, and the near-total lack of oxygen create an environment where the microbes that cause decay can't survive. The wreck is far beyond the reach of storms, currents, or human hands. As lead archaeologist Marine Sedania put it, it seems that time has stopped on the ship. It has been shielded from decay and looters, preserved in a state of near perfection that's almost unthinkable for a 500-year-old wooden ship. This wasn't just a discovery, it was the opening of a vault that held the secrets of the Renaissance. The Renaissance, from the 14th to the 17th centuries, was an age of explosive change in Europe, a rebirth of art, science, philosophy, and commerce. This was the era of Da Vinci and Michelangelo, of Copernicus and Galileo. It was also a time of intense economic expansion as a new merchant class chased goods, resources, and new markets. The Mediterranean was the superhighway of this new globalizing economy, a bustling network connecting the great city-states of Italy with the growing powers of France, Spain, and the Ottoman Empire. Ships like the one off the French coast were the lifeblood of this era, the trucks and cargo planes of their day. Finding a shipwreck from this period is rare. Finding one so intact, with its cargo and structure preserved, is unprecedented. The Camarat 4 offered a chance not to guess at the past, but to see it. It shattered the previous record for the deepest wreck in French waters, the submarine La Minerve, by a significant margin, making it a true milestone. The team at DRASM knew they were on the edge of something extraordinary. The quest was no longer about finding the wreck, it was about understanding what it had to tell us. With the site confirmed, the real exploration began. But this wasn't an expedition of scuba divers and lift bags. At these depths, direct human exploration is impossible. The investigation had to be done by proxy, using the most advanced robotic technology we have. DRSM deployed its own remotely operated vehicle, or ROV, a sophisticated robot tethered to the surface ship by a miles-long fiber optic cable. Piloted by experts in the control room above, the ROV became their eyes, ears, and hands in the abyss. The first images it sent back were breathtaking. The ROV's powerful lights sliced through the eternal darkness, illuminating a scene that hadn't been witnessed in 5 centuries. There it was, resting peacefully on the sandy seabed, the Camarat 4. It wasn't a chaotic jumble of splintered wood, it was a coherent structure. The ship, about 30 meters long and 7 meters wide, was clearly a 16th century merchant vessel. Its hull, though partly buried, looked almost whole. The team could make out key features, wooden elements, even hints of rigging, things that are almost always the first to rot away. But it was the cargo that truly left them speechless. Scattered around and within the hull were hundreds of artifacts, sitting exactly where they had settled half a millennium ago. The ROV's cameras glided over piles of ceramic jugs, their forms perfectly clear. There were stacks of plates, seemingly untouched. The scene was so orderly, so pristine, it felt less like a shipwreck and more like an underwater museum. As DRSM would later state, time has stood still here in the deep sea since the 16th century. For the archaeologists watching on monitors miles above, it was a moment of pure discovery. They were, in effect, the first people to set foot on this ship since its final tragic voyage. They could pan the cameras, zoom in on the smallest details, and begin the slow, painstaking work of cataloging what they saw. Every image, every bit of data was another piece of a 500-year-old puzzle. The discovery was over, the investigation had begun, and what the ROV revealed was a rich story of trade, technology, and daily life in the Renaissance. The Camarat 4 was a merchant ship, but what was it carrying and where was it going? The answers lay scattered on the seabed, preserved in stunning detail. The ship's cargo tells a story of commerce, culture, and the very real dangers of sea travel in the 16th century. The most striking part of the cargo was a huge collection of Italian ceramics. The ROV identified nearly 200 ceramic jugs and about 100 yellow plates. Many jugs were in incredible condition, some still sitting upright as if waiting to be unloaded. They have elegant pinched spouts and ribbon-shaped handles. Close-up shots revealed intricate decorations, floral patterns, geometric designs, but one symbol stood out. Clearly visible on many of the jugs was the Christogram IHS, the first 3 letters of Jesus' name in Greek. This religious monogram, combined with the pottery's style, allowed experts to pinpoint the cargo's origin with near certainty: the Liguria region of northern Italy. Liguria, home to today's Italian Riviera, was a major hub for ceramic production. The IHS symbol speaks volumes about the era. Religion wasn't just for church, it was woven into the fabric of daily life, right down to the markings on household goods. This massive, uniform cargo of Ligurian ceramics is concrete proof of the sophisticated trade networks that crisscross the Mediterranean. This ship was almost certainly sailing west from an Italian port, carrying a bulk shipment for markets in France. It points to a well-organized commercial system where goods were mass-produced in one region for large-scale export to another. While the ceramics speak of trade, other artifacts tell a different story, one of daily life and constant danger. The ROV spotted 6 bronze cannons among the wreckage. Artillery on a merchant ship might seem odd, but it was a grim necessity in the 16th century Mediterranean. Piracy was rampant, and a ship laden with valuable goods was a tempting target. A vessel like the Camarat 4 had to be a hybrid, part cargo hauler, part warship. The cannons were for defense, a deterrent to protect the crew and their investment.
Nearby, the robot's lights fell on 2 large bronze cooking pots, or cauldrons. These humble objects create a powerful human connection. You can almost imagine them hanging over a galley fire, bubbling with stew for a crew of sailors far from home. They speak to the practical realities of a long voyage, the communal meals and daily routines of the men whose lives depended on this ship. Along with the ship's anchors, these pots help paint a picture of a small, self-sufficient community at sea. Beyond the finished goods, the ROV also identified another key part of the cargo: iron bars. These bars, which seem to have been wrapped in plant fibers to protect them from corrosive sea air, were a strategic raw material. In the Renaissance, iron was the backbone of the economy, essential for everything from farm tools and weapons to construction and shipbuilding. Transporting raw iron was just as important as moving finished products. This discovery highlights the complexity of the Renaissance economy, which involved moving both raw materials and manufactured goods. The Camarat 4 wasn't just delivering pottery, it was a vital cog in the industrial machine of its time. A discovery like this is more than just an exciting find. It's a data point that can shift our entire understanding of the past. The Camarat 4 isn't just adding a footnote to the story of the Renaissance, it's forcing us to revise entire chapters. What they found, and the state they found it in, is challenging long-held assumptions about 16th century trade, technology, and even how archaeology itself should be done. First, the wreck gives us a high-resolution map of trade in action. Historians knew about the links between Italy and France, but the Camarat 4 provides irrefutable proof of the scale of this network. The sheer volume of ceramics, nearly 200 jugs and 100 plates from a single source, suggests something closer to mass market trade than just the movement of a few luxury items. This was bulk transport, proof of high demand, and an economic system robust enough to support it. It solidifies our picture of the Western Mediterranean as a tightly integrated economic zone.
Second, the wreck is a masterclass in 16th century shipbuilding. Because so many other wrecks are destroyed, archaeologists often have to rely on drawings or fragmented remains. but the Camarat 4 is largely intact. For naval historians, this is like finding a complete blueprint. The preserved wooden structures and hull layout offer a priceless opportunity to study shipbuilding techniques firsthand. How was cargo stowed for stability? How were the cannons mounted? How was the ship built to survive the Mediterranean? These questions can now be answered with a new level of detail. But maybe the biggest revelation is the discovery process itself. The exploration of Camarat 4 signals a new era for archaeology. For centuries, underwater archaeology has been invasive. Discovery meant excavation, bringing artifacts to the surface and, in many ways, dismantling a site to study it. The approach here is revolutionary. Led by DRSM, the plan isn't to raise the wreck. The focus is on digital preservation. Using the ROV, the team is conducting exhaustive photo and video surveys. The next step is to use photogrammetry to stitch thousands of high-resolution images into a perfect, scientifically accurate 3D model of the wreck. This digital twin will let anyone explore the ship virtually, down to the smallest detail, without ever disturbing the actual site. It's a way to bring the discovery to the world while leaving the time capsule intact in its deep-sea sanctuary. A few key artifacts will be carefully recovered by robotic arms for analysis. But the philosophy is clear. This is the future of deep-sea archaeology. Less treasure hunting, more sustainable, respectful science. The Camarat 4 isn't just rewriting the history of the Renaissance. It's helping write the future of how we study history itself. As the ROV's lights swept across the 500-year-old artifacts, they revealed something else. Something jarringly out of place. Lying among the Renaissance ceramics and next to a 16th-century anchor was a modern aluminum can. Elsewhere, the cameras spotted plastic bottles, yogurt pots, and discarded fishing nets. In this pristine, ancient scene, frozen for half a millennium, was the unmistakable footprint of our own time. The discovery of modern garbage at a depth of over 8,000 feet was a sobering moment. It's a stark reminder that there is no corner of our planet left untouched by human pollution. This debris, which slowly drifted down through miles of water to settle in the abyss, highlights a creeping environmental crisis. The deep sea, long thought to be a remote and protected realm, is actually the final destination for much of our trash. This accidental discovery, within an accidental discovery, has added a new urgent mission to the Camarat 4 project. The archaeologists and scientists have a unique opportunity and a responsibility to use this find to raise public awareness. The juxtaposition is incredibly powerful, a perfectly preserved moment of history being contaminated by the disposable waste of our present. The image of a soda can resting near a 500-year-old artifact is an indictment of our modern lifestyle. The French authorities have embraced this dual mission. The announcement of the shipwreck was strategically made during a United Nations conference on oceanic issues, amplifying the call to combat plastic pollution. The research team now plans to weave environmental awareness into all of their public outreach, using the haunting images from the wreck to show just how far our impact reaches. The Camarat 4, therefore, tells two stories. One is a story of our past, of commerce, innovation, and adventure. The other is a story of our present, a cautionary tale about our relationship with the oceans. This Renaissance time capsule has become a mirror, reflecting not only the world of the 16th century, but also the challenges of the 21st. The story of the Camarat 4 is one of chance and science, of the ancient and modern colliding in the crushing dark of the abyss. It began with a routine naval patrol and a curious blip on a sonar screen, and it has blossomed into one of the most significant underwater discoveries of our time. At a depth once thought unreachable, a 16th-century merchant ship survived for 500 years, its secrets held safe by the cold, the dark, and the immense pressure of the deep sea.
This is far more than just a wreck. It is a true time capsule. Within its hull, we have a cross-section of Renaissance life.
The beautiful ceramics that filled homes, the cannons that protected fortunes, the cauldrons that fed sailors, and the iron bars that built economies. It is a find that sharpens our understanding of the sophisticated trade networks that powered a golden age. The Camarat 4 has also become a symbol of a new frontier in exploration, where robotics and digital imaging allow us to touch the past without destroying its final resting place. The plan to create a digital replica for the world to see is a testament to a future where science values preservation over possession. Yet this story also carries a stark warning. The intrusion of modern pollution into this ancient scene reminds us how fragile our world is. The Camarat 4 is not just a relic, it's a piece of shared human heritage that now needs protection from the consequences of our own time. This single ship has opened a breathtakingly clear window into the past, but it also forces us to ask a bigger question. How many other time capsules are still out there, waiting in the abyss, holding keys to a history we think we know? The ocean still guards its secrets, but every so often it lets us peek inside. The voyage of the Camarat 4 ended 500 years ago, but its journey as a vessel of discovery has only just begun.
Beneath the quiet, historic streets of York, England, a city we think of for its medieval walls and its Viking past, lies a much older story, a Roman story. For nearly 4 centuries, this was Eboracum, a formidable fortress on the northern frontier of the world's greatest empire. It was a city of emperors and legions, a hub of raw power. But what if the official story, the one written in texts and grand histories, is missing a crucial and much more brutal chapter? We've always known the Romans brought their culture with them, their laws, their language, their gods, and we suspected they brought their savage entertainments. Mosaics and scraps of text hinted at the spectacles held in provincial amphitheaters, but these were just whispers, echoes of a violent past. There was never any hard proof in Britain, not a single bone, until now. In 2025, the re-examination of a skeleton first excavated years earlier would completely rewrite the story of Roman Britain. The bones belonged to a man who lived and died violently, but as forensic scientists looked closer, a shocking detail emerged, something never before seen. Unmistakable, deeply scored puncture marks, the kind of marks that could only be made by one of the most powerful predators on Earth. This wasn't just another casualty of a tough era. The marks on his bones are the first direct, physical evidence of combat between a human and a lion on British soil. The story begins, as so many of Britain's Roman stories do, with the collision of the modern world and the ancient past. The site is Driffield Terrace, a residential street just outside York's famous city walls. For years, this area has been an archaeological enigma. Excavations between 2004 and 2005 uncovered a unique cemetery. It held the remains of over 80 men, almost all of them young, powerfully built, and a staggering number, well over half, had been decapitated. This strange combination of factors led to a tantalizing theory. Driffield Terrace was a cemetery for gladiators. These men, living on the edge of society, celebrated in the arena but scorned in social circles, were often buried in separate plots. Driffield Terrace seemed to fit perfectly. Yet for 2 decades it remained a hypothesis, a compelling story without its smoking gun.
Then, new analysis in 2025 by a team from York Archaeology and Maynooth University changed everything. They focused on one skeleton in particular. He was a male, tall for his time, with the bone structure of someone whose body was both a tool and a weapon. Healed fractures spoke of past battles, a life of brutal conflict. He fit the profile of the Driffield Terrace men, But the team knew the real test would come in the lab. It was there, under the sterile lights of the conservation laboratory, that an osteoarchaeologist noticed them. On the pelvis were deep, crescent-shaped gouges. These weren't the clean cuts of a sword, nor the crush of a hammer. These were punctures. Deep, conical impressions punched right into the bone. The initial reaction was stunned confusion. An animal attack? Maybe a wolf or a bear? But the size and spacing didn't match. The force required to leave such marks would have been immense. As the team stared at the digitally enhanced images, an almost unbelievable hypothesis began to form. A hypothesis that, if proven, would send shockwaves through the world of Roman history. The marks looked like they had been made by a great cat, a lion. The very idea seems preposterous. A lion in northern England nearly 2,000 years ago? It sounds like something from a fantasy novel, not a peer-reviewed report. For centuries, the image of gladiators battling lions was seen as a dramatic motif confined to Hollywood and the Grand Colosseum in Rome. Mosaics, like one found in a Roman villa at Rudston, showed scenes of hunters and beasts. But these were often dismissed as artistic fantasy, imported imagery to show how worldly the owner was, not a reflection of local reality. The historical consensus was that such lavish and dangerous spectacles, known as venetanes, or beast hunts, were for the empire's wealthy heartland.
And think of the logistics. Transporting a lion from its native North Africa or Mesopotamia to the remote province of Britannia would have been a nightmare. These animals were ferociously expensive. Diocletian's edict on maximum prices from the late 3rd century set the price of a first-class male lion at 150,000 denarii. A legionary soldier at the time earned about 1,200 denarii a year. A single lion cost more than a soldier's entire lifetime earnings. The idea that a provincial governor in an outpost like Eboracum would spend such a fortune for a day's entertainment seemed far-fetched. And yet, the evidence was there, etched into the very bones of this man from Driftfield Terrace. The discovery posed a profound, history-altering question. Was this a one-off, freak event, or did it point to a previously unknown, far more brutal reality of entertainment in Roman Britain? Most importantly, could they prove it? An extraordinary claim demands extraordinary proof. The team knew the academic world would be skeptical, so they launched a multidisciplinary investigation that left no room for doubt. The first step was to identify the biter. This is where archaeology and forensics intersect. The team collaborated with forensic anthropologists and zooarchaeologists, including specialists from Cranfield and Maynooth universities. The pelvic bone became the subject of one of the most intense examinations ever conducted on an archaeological find. It started with ultra-high-resolution 3D laser scanning, creating a perfect digital model of the bone and bite marks with microscopic precision. But a model wasn't enough. They needed a comparison. In a novel move, the team worked with zoological parks to obtain the skulls of deceased lions, tigers, and bears, creating experimental bite marks on materials that mimicked human bone. They built a library of bites. The crushing damage of a bear was ruled out. The slicing marks of a tiger were close, but not a perfect match. Then they analyzed the lion. The specific placement of a lion's massive canine teeth and the incredible bite force it generates created a unique signature. When they overlaid the 3D model of the experimental lion bite with the scan of the gladiator's pelvis, the results were breathtaking. It was a perfect match. The spacing, the shape, the angle, every detail aligned. The team had its confirmation.
But who was this man? Isotopic analysis, a technique that reads the chemical signatures in teeth and bone, was used on skeletons from the Driftfield Terrace site. The enamel on our teeth reflects the geology of where we grew up. The results from the cemetery were astonishing, showing a diverse range of geographical origins.
Some men were local Britons, but others came from much further afield, with some having African ancestry or origins in the Middle East. This man, a foreigner brought to York from a distant corner of the empire, fit the profile of this cosmopolitan group of fighters. Further analysis into bone collagen often provides insight into diet. Studies on other gladiator cemeteries, like the one in Ephesus, show a diet high in carbohydrates, like barley and beans. This so-called gladiator diet was thought to build up a layer of fat, protecting muscles and organs from superficial cuts, and making for a bloodier, more dramatic show for the crowd. The evidence was painting a vivid picture. A man, born hundreds or maybe thousands of miles away, who lived a life of brutal, organized violence, and who likely died in an arena in northern Britain, mauled by a lion. The bite was unhealed, suggesting it was the cause of death. One final piece of the puzzle remained: the decapitation. Like many others at Driffield Terrace, this man was beheaded. The clean cut marks suggest it was methodical. Since the lion bite was likely fatal, the decapitation was probably a post-mortem ritual, a mysterious practice whose true meaning remains unclear. To understand the significance of this skeleton, we have to look at the world he inhabited, the 3rd century AD city of Eboracum. This wasn't some sleepy backwater. It was one of the most important cities in Roman Britain, the administrative and military capital for the entire northern province. Emperors like Septimius Severus and Constantius Chlorus spent time, and even died, in the city. It was, for all intents and purposes, a regional capital of the Roman world. And a Roman capital needed Roman entertainment. Bread and circuses was a cornerstone of Roman social policy, a political tool for the elite to display their power and generosity. While the Colosseum is the most famous example, amphitheaters were a standard feature of major Roman cities. In Britain, remains have been found in Chester, London, and Caerleon. For many years, the lack of a confirmed amphitheater in York was a perplexing absence for a city of its importance. This discovery makes its existence all but certain. The events in these provincial arenas mirrored those in Rome. The day might begin with the venenations, wild beast hunts, or the grim spectacle of damnatio ad bestias, where criminals were thrown to beasts with no defense. A bronze key handle found in Leicester in 2021, depicting a man being attacked by a lion, was the first artistic proof that this brutal execution happened in Britain. The skeleton from York now provides the first stark physical proof. Following the beast hunts came the main event, gladiatorial combat. These men were a paradox. Most were slaves, prisoners of war, or criminals, but the best of them became superstars, admired for their skill and bravery. Their lives were a strange mix of degradation and privilege. They received excellent medical care, their owners had a financial interest in their assets, and were trained relentlessly in fighting schools. Their lives were short and violent, but in the arena they could achieve a kind of glory. The presence of a man from a distant land in York who died fighting a lion tells us that the machinery of the Roman games was a vast, interconnected network that could pluck a man from one end of the empire and an animal from another and bring them together for a spectacle of death in a cold northern province. The evidence is in. The reports are complete. Let's try to reconstruct the final, fateful day of this man. Imagine the city of Eboracum around the 3rd century AD. A festival is underway, and an event has been sponsored to impress the populace and reaffirm Roman power. The day begins with a procession, the Pompa, as the gladiators parade through the streets. Our man is among them, in his late 20s or early 30s, a veteran of several fights. He's a foreigner here, a man whose childhood was spent under a different sun. He arrives at the amphitheater, a buzzing cauldron of noise on the city's outskirts. The morning's events are a grim appetizer, the beast hunts. Then the climax of the morning show. A cage is wheeled into the center of the arena. The gate lifts and a creature emerges, blinking in the pale British sunlight. A lion. For most people here, it's a creature of myth, something they've only seen in mosaics. The astronomical cost of its presence here is a clear statement of wealth and power. We don't know the exact circumstances of the encounter. Was he a trained beast fighter, a bestiarius, meant to fight the animal? The evidence suggests the encounter was brutal and decisive. We can imagine the scene. The lion, agitated and confused, makes its move. It doesn't go for the throat, but lunges low, its immense jaw clamping down on the gladiator's hip, the canines punching through muscle and sinew to grate against bone. The force is incredible, crippling him. The fight is over. The bite is fatal. His body is removed from the arena. As a gladiator, he is socially disgraced and cannot be buried in a normal cemetery. He is taken to a separate plot of land outside the city walls, a place for men like him, Driftfield Terrace. There, in a final, mysterious ritual, his body is decapitated and he is laid in a simple grave. There he will lie for over 1,700 years, a silent keeper of a shocking secret, waiting for his story to finally be told.
The analysis of the skeleton from Driftfield Terrace is more than a remarkable archaeological find. It's a paradigm shift. For generations, the popular view of Roman Britain was that it was a tamer, more subdued version of Rome. We believed the bloody excesses of the Colosseum were largely left behind in the Mediterranean. This one skeleton, and the undeniable story written on his bones, shatters that illusion. It provides the first direct, physical evidence for the brutal reality of human-animal combat on British soil. It confirms that the most elaborate and costly spectacles of the Roman world were exported to the furthest corners of the empire. It suggests that a provincial capital like Eboracum was a fully fledged Roman city, complete with the savage entertainments that defined its culture. The man from Driftfield Terrace forces us to look again at the foundations of a city like York, and to see beyond the Viking longships to the harder, more violent world that came before. His skeleton is more than just ancient bone. It's a testament to the immense, interconnected, and brutal world the Romans built, a world hidden just beneath our feet, where the roar of a lion could echo across the landscape of northern England. Deep within the green mountains and lush river valleys of what we now call Colombia, a civilization of master artists once thrived. They were a people of profound spiritual beliefs, complex societies, and a mastery of metal that was among the finest in the ancient Americas. They were the Kumbaya. For centuries, they lived and worked in the temperate climate of the Cauca River Valley, leaving behind a legacy not in great stone monuments, but in objects of breathtaking gold. But this wasn't gold as we think of it, not money, but a sacred vessel, a passport to the afterlife, a symbol of power and connection to the divine. They crafted thousands of objects, each a testament to their skill and their worldview. But time, as it always does, buried their world. The Great Kumbaya Classic period came to a close around the 10th century AD, and the culture transformed. Their cities were reclaimed by the jungle, their stories fading into myth, and their treasures were left waiting silently in the earth. When those tombs were finally reopened centuries later, the world was stunned by the golden wonders they held. In the mountains of Colombia, a civilization of master goldsmiths left behind a treasure of stunning artifacts. But among these marvels, a handful of objects defy any easy explanation. Are these just stylized animals, or could they be blueprints of a technology that shouldn't have existed over 1,000 years ago? To even begin to understand these artifacts, we have to understand the people who made them. Just who were the Kumbaya? The name has become a sort of catch-all for various cultures in the area, but archaeologists have identified a distinct Kumbaya Classic period, a golden age that peaked between the 4th and 7th centuries AD. This was a society built on the rich volcanic soil of the Cauca Valley. They were skilled farmers, growing maize, and they were hunters too. Their society was organized into chiefdoms, with a leader, or cacique, at the top. These weren't just political figures. They were seen as intermediaries between our world and the spirit world. Their power was broadcast through the gold they wore. Exquisite nose rings, crowns, and pendants weren't just jewelry. They were emblems of prestige and spiritual authority. The Kumbaya were a people deeply connected to nature. Their religion was likely animistic, a belief that spirits inhabit the natural world, and you can see this everywhere in their art. They created stunning zoomorphic figures, representations of birds, insects, fish, and bats, alongside figures of men and women, often with serene expressions and closed eyes, as if in a deep trance. These weren't just art for art's sake. Many were made as offerings for the dead, placed in elaborate tombs, sometimes inside sarcophagi made from hollowed-out trees. They believed in an afterlife, and these golden objects were guardians for that final journey. Their daily lives were rich with ritual. One of the most important was the chewing of coca leaves with lime, a sacred act of communicating with the divine. At the heart of this ritual was a unique object, the poporo. A poporo is a vessel used to hold powdered lime. A user would moisten a stick, dip it into the lime, and transfer it to the coca leaves in their mouth. Over time, the mix of lime and saliva would form a hardened crust on the poporo, a physical record of a life of ritual. The Kumbaya culture was a vibrant mix of farming, metallurgy, and profound spiritual belief. But their golden age didn't last forever. After the 10th century, the culture changed and evolved. Then, in 1539, the Spanish conquistadors arrived. The encounter was a catastrophe. Disease, slavery, and war decimated the indigenous populations. Within decades, their world was shattered, and their golden treasures became the stuff of legend, a lure for grave robbers for centuries to come.
The sheer artistry of the Kumbaya is hard to overstate. Even the Spanish conquerors, who weren't exactly known for their cultural appreciation, were astonished by their metalwork, considering it some of the finest in the Americas. The Kumbaya weren't just artisans, they were master metallurgists. Their primary medium wasn't always pure gold. They developed an ingenious alloy called tumbaga, a mix of gold and copper. Adding copper lowered the melting point, making the metal easier to cast. It also made it harder and more durable, all while keeping that beautiful golden shine. Their main manufacturing method was one of the most sophisticated techniques of the ancient world, lost wax casting. The process starts with a perfect, detailed model of the object sculpted from beeswax. This wax model is then carefully encased in a shell of fine clay. Once the clay mold dries, it's fired. The heat hardens the clay and melts the wax inside, which runs out, leaving a perfectly hollow impression of the original sculpture. The wax is lost. Then came the magic. Molten tumbaga or gold, heated to over 1,000 degrees Celsius, was poured into the hollow mold. After cooling, the ceramic mold was broken away, revealing the finished metal object. This technique allowed them to create objects of incredible complexity, even hollow ones, a remarkable feat of engineering. Using this method, they created a breathtaking array of artifacts. The most famous is the Poporo Kumbaya, a tumbaga vessel from around 300 CE, now a national symbol of Colombia and the centerpiece of the Gold Museum in Bogotá. It's a masterpiece of design, shaped like a gourd, representing fertility and cosmic balance. But beyond the poporos, they made so much more. There were human figures, seated on stools, a symbol of rank. They made stunning jewelry and a whole menagerie of animal figures. This is where their reverence for nature truly shines. We see birds, bats, insects, and fish, all rendered in polished tumbaga. These weren't meant to be exact copies, but artistic interpretations that captured the spirit of the animal. And it's within this category of stylized animals that we find the objects that would, 1,000 years later, ignite a firestorm of controversy. For decades, Kumbaya artifacts were seen for what they appeared to be, masterfully crafted ritual objects from a gifted pre-Columbian culture. But in the second half of the 20th century, a new and radical idea began to take hold, one that reframed a small number of these objects not as relics of the past, but as artifacts of a forgotten future. This shift was fueled by the ancient astronaut theory, popularized by authors like Erich von Däniken. In his 1968 bestseller, Chariots of the Gods, von Däniken proposed a heretical idea. What if intelligent extraterrestrials visited Earth in our ancient past and were mistaken for gods? He argued that these visitors were responsible for many of the world's ancient mysteries, from the pyramids to the Nazca lines. In this new light, strange artifacts were re-examined, and a handful of Kumbaya pendants, just a few inches long, were singled out and given a new, explosive identity: the Kumbaya airplanes. Proponents of this theory ask us to forget the stylized animal label. When you do, they argue, the resemblance to modern aircraft is uncanny. They point to features that seem distinctly mechanical. These objects have what look like wings, but they're rigid, geometric, and set low on the body. Most striking of all, they have a prominent, upright tail fin, what we call a vertical stabilizer. This is a feature crucial for flight stability in modern aircraft, but it's not found on birds or insects in this configuration.
Then there are the wings. On several of the most famous examples, the wings are swept back, closely resembling the delta wing design of a supersonic jet. Delta wings are a sophisticated aerodynamic design used for stability at high speeds. Why, theorists ask, would an ancient artist with no knowledge of flight carve an insect with delta wings? The argument is simple. These objects, ancient astronaut theorists contend, look more like flying machines than they do flying animals. One researcher, Dr. Ivan Sanderson, concluded one of the artifacts looked too mechanical to be any known creature. Another, German aviation expert J.A. Ulrich, went further, stating one of the gold figures looked strikingly similar to a modern Saab jet. The theory suggests the Kumbaya weren't the inventors. They were witnesses. Perhaps they saw advanced flying machines, vimanas from ancient Indian texts, or the ships of alien visitors. Lacking the context to understand it, they recreated these incredible objects in the most sacred material they knew, gold, as representations of powerful sky gods. According to this theory, these tiny golden pendants are eyewitness accounts, models of a technology that flew on Earth 1,000 years before the Wright brothers. For years, the debate was a war of words. Archaeologists saw stylized animals. Theorists saw miniature jets. But what if there was a way to test the claim? What if you could find out if these things could actually fly? In the 1990s, a trio of German researchers, Algund Einbohm, Peter Belting, and Konrad Lubbers, decided to do just that. Their idea was simple. If these 2-inch gold objects were really models of aircraft, then a scaled-up version should be able to fly.
Belting and Lubbers, both experienced in model aircraft construction, took on the challenge. They chose the most controversial figures, the ones with delta wings and upright tail fins. They meticulously studied the tiny pendants and built radio-controlled scale models, faithful to the proportions of the originals but with wingspans of 3 to 4 feet. They fitted one with a standard propeller engine. The results were astonishing. The models flew, and they didn't just stumble through the air. According to the researchers, they flew with remarkable stability. The team reported that the design, which archaeologists had dismissed as a stylized insect, was perfectly aerodynamic. The swept-back wings provided lift, and the prominent tail fin acted as a perfect stabilizer. To push it further, they built another model and fitted it with a small jet engine. The result was the same.
The Kumbaya design proved to be a stable airframe even when powered by a modern jet. For believers, this was the ultimate vindication. It was no longer just a "looks like" argument. This seemed to be empirical evidence. How could a pre-Columbian artist carving a fish or an insect accidentally stumble upon a design so aerodynamically sophisticated that a scaled-up, powered version could fly with precision? The argument was now twofold. Not only did the artifacts look like airplanes, but proponents claimed they had been shown to fly like airplanes. While the flight tests made for a compelling story, the academic community remained unconvinced. For archaeologists, the ancient airplane theory is a classic case of pseudo-archaeology. It ignores context, cherry-picks evidence, and imposes our modern world onto an ancient culture. So, what's the mainstream explanation? It's about looking at the objects not in isolation, but as part of a larger cultural world.
First, archaeologists classify these objects as zoomorphic, meaning they're stylized animals. The Kumbaya made thousands of such objects depicting local fauna. Birds, frogs, bats, and insects are all common. The so-called airplanes are just a tiny fraction of this massive artistic output. When you see them alongside the full spectrum of Kumbaya art, they don't seem so out of place. The point isn't that they are perfect copies of animals. Pre-Columbian art is often highly stylized. Artists weren't trying to create a photograph. They were trying to capture an animal's spiritual essence or its most important features. So, what animals could they be? One strong possibility is a type of catfish found in the Kalka River Valley, specifically the sucker-mouthed catfish. These fish have rigid pectoral fins that stick out from the body, much like the wings on the artifacts. Some species also have a prominent erect dorsal fin and a tail that could easily be stylized into the stabilizers on the gold figures. Another candidate is the flying fish. The very idea of a fish that flies would have been incredibly potent, a creature that bridges the worlds of water and air, and their shape could easily be stylized into the artifacts we see. Insects like moths or dragonflies are another major source of inspiration. But what about those aerodynamic features? Archaeologists argue it's a misinterpretation. What theorists call a vertical stabilizer is simply the animal's tail, and the horizontal stabilizer is the tail fin. The upright look is an artistic choice, not an engineering one. The delta wings are just a stylistic rendering of fins, not a recreation of a supersonic airfoil.
And as for the flight tests, skeptics are quick to point out a critical fact. You can make almost any shape fly if you add an engine, control surfaces, and get the center of gravity right. The German models weren't exact replicas. They required propellers, jet engines, and, crucially, ailerons and rudders to be controlled. The original artifacts have none of that. The fact that a modified, powered model can fly doesn't prove the original was designed for flight. For archaeologists, the case is clear. These are not ancient airplanes. They are beautiful, stylized representations of the natural world. The archaeological explanation seems sound and logical. For many, that's where the story ends. But for those who believe in a lost high technology, the mainstream view is an unsatisfying attempt to force these strange objects into a pre-existing box. They argue that archaeologists are ignoring the very details that make these objects so unique. Their rebuttal starts with the catfish theory. Okay, they say, but where are the other defining features? Where are the characteristic whiskers or barbels? Where is the sucker mouth? Kumbaya artists were masters of detail. Why would they include a perfect tail assembly but leave out the most recognizable parts of the animal? The same critique is applied to the insect and bird theories. Proponents ask you to look closely at the tail. In almost every case, it's a single vertical fin. No insect has that, no bird has that. A fishtail has vertical components, but not typically in this clean, airplane-like configuration. Then there's the wing placement. On the most airplane-like models, the wings are on the bottom of the fuselage. That's a common design in modern low-wing aircraft. But in nature, it's the opposite.
A bird's wings are high on its torso to support the body mass below. An insect's wings are on top of its thorax. A design with the wings on the bottom is not a stable configuration for a biological creature. Proponents also point to the consistency of the design. These aren't just one-off oddities. A number of similar objects have been found across Colombia, Costa Rica, and Peru. They all share the same strange features: tapered fuselage, geometric wings, and an upright tail. This suggests, they argue, that the artists were all working from a common real-world model. They were all depicting the same thing. And what about the argument that anything can fly? Proponents argue this misses the point. The German models didn't just lurch into the air, they flew with exceptional stability. Peter Belting, one of the engineers, said the objects demonstrated perfect aerodynamics. The question isn't just can it fly, but why does it fly so well? Why would a stylized fish just happen to possess the precise characteristics of a stable, high-speed aircraft? Is it truly simpler to believe that a dozen ancient artists accidentally incorporated multiple principles of advanced aerodynamics? Or is it simpler to believe they just carved what they saw? While that debate rages on, another, very different controversy surrounds the Kumbaya artifacts. This one isn't about aliens or ancient tech, but about ownership, heritage, and the long shadow of colonialism. This is the very real fight over the Kumbaya treasure. The story begins in 1891, when the Colombian government, under President Carlos Holguin, purchased a spectacular hoard of gold artifacts found by grave robbers. But the government didn't buy it to keep. At the time, Colombia was in a border dispute with Venezuela, and Spain had agreed to arbitrate. As a gesture of gratitude, in 1893, President Holguin gifted 122 of the most spectacular Kumbaya pieces to the Queen Regent of Spain. That collection eventually found its home in the Museum of America, in Madrid, where it remains to this day. For over a century, this was just a historical footnote. But recently, a global conversation about cultural heritage has exploded. Nations are demanding the return of artifacts taken during the colonial era. Colombians began to argue that the treasure was not the president's personal property to give away. It was the inalienable heritage of the entire nation. The fight reached a turning point in 2017, when the Colombian Constitutional Court ruled that the treasure was indeed a protected part of the nation's cultural heritage, and ordered the government to do everything necessary to get it back. Armed with this ruling, the Colombian government has formally requested the treasure's return. In May of 2024, the Ministers of Foreign Affairs and Culture sent a letter to their Spanish counterparts proposing the collection's return. Spain's position, however, remains firm. The Spanish government argues the acquisition was a legal gift from one head of state to another, not colonial plunder. As recently as March 2025, Spain's Ministry of Foreign Affairs was reported to have reaffirmed its stance, insisting on its legitimate ownership of the collection. The impasse continues. For Colombia, it's about restoring a piece of an indigenous heritage that was nearly wiped out. For Spain, giving it up could set a precedent for countless other claims. The Kumbaya treasure, once buried in quiet tombs, now sits at the heart of a complex international debate about history, ownership, and how we heal the wounds of the past. We're left at a crossroads. On one path is the world of mainstream archaeology. Here, the Kumbaya artifacts are the stunning, stylized creations of a gifted civilization, elegant representations of the fish and insects that filled their world. The resemblance to aircraft is a trick of the eye, our modern minds projecting our world onto theirs. On the other path is a far more speculative reality. Here, these small golden objects are evidence, miniature models of advanced flying machines, documented by ancient artists who saw something far beyond their own understanding. In this view, the flight tests are a whisper from the past, a hint that our history is not as simple as we believe. And then there's the third, undeniable reality. A priceless piece of this civilization's heritage sits in a museum thousands of miles from its home, the subject of a passionate struggle for historical justice. So what are we to make of the Kumbaya legacy? Are we looking at stylized insects or meticulously rendered aircraft? Is the truth buried in the Cauca Valley, or is it hidden in a museum vault in Madrid? You decide. For 3,000 years, he's been a hero in a story. A king who battled gods and monsters on a torturous, decade-long journey home. Odysseus, a name that means myth, cunning, and epic adventure. His story, the Odyssey, isn't just a cornerstone of literature. It's a poem so powerful it has shaped the very way we think. But that's all it was ever supposed to be, a poem, a story. But what if the story was real? For centuries, scholars and adventurers have picked apart the Greek islands, desperate for any trace of the world Homer described. They looked for the palace of Agamemnon, the walls of Troy, and the lost island kingdom of Ithaca. And while they found stunning successes, connecting archaeology to epic poetry, Odysseus himself always remained a ghost. There was never a body, never a palace, never one piece of hard, physical evidence to suggest the wily king of Ithaca was a man of flesh and blood. He was a literary device, a symbol of the Greek spirit, but not a historical figure. Until now. Because recent discoveries at a remote site on Ithaca are threatening to tear up the history books. Archaeologists have unearthed something that forces us to question the solid line we draw between myth and reality. They have found compelling evidence that the legendary king of Ithaca wasn't just a character in a poem, but a real figure worshipped by his own people as a hero god. And if that's true, the implications are staggering. It would mean that for the ancient Greeks, Odysseus wasn't a myth at all. To them, he was history. And now, modern archaeology may have just found the proof. Before we get to the windswept hills of modern Ithaca and the trenches of a groundbreaking dig, we have to understand the sheer scale of the myth we're dealing with. Who was Odysseus? To the ancient Greeks, he was a giant of the Mycenaean Age, the era of the Trojan War, a time that was already ancient history to them. He was king of Ithaca, a small rocky island in the Ionian Sea. He wasn't the strongest hero, like Achilles, or the most powerful king, like Agamemnon. His superpower was his mind. He was polymetis, a man of many turns, endlessly cunning and resourceful. It was his mind that came up with the Trojan horse, the trick that finally ended a 10-year war. But his greatest story starts after the war. While the other Greek heroes sailed for home, Odysseus made an enemy of the sea god Poseidon and was cursed to wander the seas for another 10 years. His journey, the Odyssey, is a masterclass in survival. He faced the Cyclops, a one-eyed giant. He resisted the lethal song of the sirens. He navigated between a six-headed monster and a deadly whirlpool. He even journeyed into the underworld. And he did it all for one reason: to get home to his wife Penelope and his son Telemachus. The story is so much more than an adventure. It's a foundational text of civilization, exploring what it means to come home, what defines our identity, and the struggle of one person against the whims of the gods. For 3 millennia, this is who Odysseus has been, the hero of the world's greatest travel story. And because of all the fantasy, the monsters, the magic, the gods directly intervening, historians have always placed Odysseus and his entire journey firmly in the box labeled mythology. A brilliant story, they'd say, a masterpiece of oral tradition finally written down by the poet we call Homer around the 8th century BCE, but not history. The search for a historical Odysseus, then, was always seen as a fringe pursuit, something like looking for King Arthur's Camelot. Archaeologists did, of course, make incredible breakthroughs.
In the 19th century, the controversial genius Heinrich Schliemann followed the clues in Homer's Iliad and found the ruins of a great Bronze Age city in Turkey. He declared to the world he had found Troy. He then dug at Mycenae in Greece and uncovered graves so full of gold he was convinced he'd found the tomb of Agamemnon himself. These discoveries proved the world Homer described, the Mycenaean Bronze Age, was real. The Trojan War, or at least a massive conflict between Greeks and Trojans, very likely did happen. But this only made the Odysseus problem worse. If Troy was real, and Agamemnon's citadel was real, then where was Ithaca's palace? Where was its king? For decades, archaeologists searched Ithaca. They found Mycenaean tombs, pottery, and small settlements. They found hints, but nothing definitive. There was no grand palace like the one in the Odyssey, no structure that could be called the home of a great king. The trail went cold. Odysseus, it seemed, was a ghost. The general consensus settled. Even if a real local chieftain on Ithaca once existed, his story was so tangled with myth that the original man was lost to time. The search was over. But, as it turns out, they were all looking for the wrong thing. They were looking for a palace. They should have been looking for a shrine. Our story now takes us to northern Ithaca, to a rugged, beautiful site on the slopes of the village of Exogi, overlooking the Ionian Sea. For more than 200 years, this place has carried a strange local name, the School of Homer. It's a name born from a folk belief that the great poet himself might have taught here, inspired by the very landscape he made immortal.
The site is dramatic. Man-made terraces are connected by staircases carved right into the bedrock. An ancient tower stands on the upper terrace, and a large, robust building forms the core of the complex below. For years, it was just a local curiosity. Systematic excavations began here in the 1990s, led by Greek archaeologists Athanasios Papadopoulos and Litsa Kontorli Papadopoulou. They found evidence of human activity stretching back millennia, all the way to the Neolithic period. Crucially, they found significant material from the Mycenaean period, the time of Odysseus. Fragments from dozens of vessels proved that during the era of the Trojan War, this was an important settlement. One of the most remarkable finds was a preserved underground fountain built with a corbelled stone roof, a classic, sophisticated Mycenaean design. This wasn't just a well, it was a serious piece of engineering. Papadopoulos himself became convinced he had found the palace of Odysseus, but he felt he never found the final, definitive proof to make it public. Work continued, but the earth-shattering evidence remained buried. Then, starting in 2018, a new team from the University of Ioannina, led by Professor Janos G. Lolos, took a fresh look at the site. Their goal was to re-evaluate everything that had been found at the School of Homer. And it was this patient re-examination that would change everything. The team wasn't just looking for new artifacts, they were recontextualizing old ones. They focused not just on the Mycenaean ruins, but on what happened at the site after the Bronze Age collapsed. They looked at the layers from the Hellenistic and Roman periods, 1,000 years after Odysseus would have lived. And it was in these later layers that they found him. At the Agios Athanasios site, the formal name for the School of Homer, the new team was doing meticulous historical detective work. They noted the niches carved into the rock walls, clearly designed to hold offerings. This wasn't a house. The layout, the permanence, the deliberate niches, it all pointed to one thing. This was a place of ritual. It was a purpose-built place of worship. But who was being worshipped here? The first clues came from stamped roof tiles. Some had the inscription DH, likely for Demosios, meaning public, confirming it was a state or civic building. But the team was examining other, seemingly ordinary fragments of terracotta, and on one of them they found it. Carved into the clay before it was fired 2,000 years ago were Greek letters. As they carefully cleaned the fragment, the inscription became clear. Odysseus. For anyone who reads Greek, the meaning is instant and unmistakable. It's the name Odysseus in the genitive case. It means of Odysseus or belonging to Odysseus. This wasn't graffiti. This was on a roof tile of a public building. It implied the building itself belonged to Odysseus. It could mean this was the temple of Odysseus. It was an electrifying discovery. But in archaeology, one find is an anomaly. You need a pattern. The team kept searching, and they found another one. This fragment bore a different inscription, Odyssea. This is the name Odysseus in the dative case. It means to Odysseus or for Odysseus. This was likely part of a dedication left by a pilgrim.
Suddenly, the picture snapped into focus. These weren't two random inscriptions. One claimed the space for Odysseus. The other made a dedication to Odysseus. This was not a coincidence. This was proof of active, organized worship. This new evidence threw a dramatic new light on an even older discovery. Nearly a century ago, in a nearby cave, archaeologists had found a fragment of a terracotta mask. Scratched onto it was a prayer, Ehin Odysseae, which translates to a vow to Odysseus or thanks Odysseus. For decades, that mask was a fascinating but lonely find. Some scholars dismissed it as a one-off dedication by a fan of the poem. But now, it was no longer an outlier. It was part of a clear, widespread pattern. The people of Ithaca weren't just telling stories about Odysseus. They were praying to him. They were thanking him. They were building sanctuaries in his name. The inscriptions proved this site was an Odysseon, a sanctuary dedicated to the hero Odysseus. This was a monumental find, but the true richness of the discovery came from the artifacts found within it, the physical prayers and gifts left by ancient pilgrims. Perhaps the most personal artifact unearthed was a miniature bronze bust of a man. He has a beard and wears a pilos, a pointed felt cap. This is the classic, unmistakable look of Odysseus in Greco-Roman art. Finding this statue was like finding a photograph of the person everyone was there to honor. It gave a face to the worship, dating to the Roman period and showing the cult was active for an incredibly long time. But it was just one of thousands of objects. The team cataloged a huge number of votive offerings. They found 34 fragments of clay figurines, the kind an ordinary person could afford. They found ritual vessels for ceremonies. And then they found something fascinating, numerous loom weights and spindle whorls. These are tools for spinning thread and weaving, tasks almost exclusively done by women in the ancient world. Their presence here is deeply significant. Who is the most famous weaver in all of Greek literature? Penelope, Odysseus's loyal wife, who wove a shroud by day and secretly unwove it every night to trick the suitors. It's highly likely that women came to this sanctuary, praying not just to Odysseus, but perhaps invoking the perseverance and fidelity of his heroic wife. Beyond these personal items, the dig revealed signs of real wealth. Gold and bronze jewelry were found, offerings from richer patrons. But most revealing of all were the coins, over 100 of them. And they weren't just from Ithaca. They were minted in city-states from all over the Greek and Roman worlds. This is a crucial piece of evidence. The coins prove that the sanctuary of Odysseus was not just some quirky local shrine. It was a major pilgrimage destination. People were traveling from across the Mediterranean to this specific spot to pay homage to Odysseus. For centuries, a steady stream of visitors came here, leaving behind coins, jewelry, and prayers. This wasn't a place where stories of Odysseus were simply told. It was a place where people lived their faith in him. So, what does this all really mean? We have a sanctuary, inscriptions, a statue, and offerings from across the ancient world. Does this finally prove that Odysseus was a real man who lived and breathed? The answer is more complex and, frankly, far more interesting. What these discoveries prove is something much more profound.
To the ancient Greeks themselves, Odysseus was absolutely real. He was not a character of fiction. He was a founding father, an ancestral king, and a hero powerful enough to be worshipped.
This is where we have to re-examine the ancient Greek concept of the hero cult. Hero cults were a vital part of religious life, running parallel to the worship of the main Olympian gods. Heroes were often legendary kings or great founders who, because of their extraordinary lives, were believed to hold power after death. They were tied to specific locations, their supposed tombs or homes, and could act as mediators between mortals and gods. The Athenians, for example, worshipped their mythical founder king Theseus as a symbol of their city's strength. The discovery of the Odysseon on Ithaca proves, with overwhelming physical evidence, that Odysseus was the center of a major hero cult. He was to Ithaca what Theseus was to Athens, their foundational hero, their patron saint. For the people who lived there, the line between myth and history that we obsess over was blurry, or maybe didn't exist at all. Homer's epics weren't just literature, they were a form of history, an account of the great deeds of their ancestors. This is the critical shift in our understanding. We, in the modern world, draw a hard line between history and myth. The ancient Greeks did not. For them, the past was a living tapestry woven with divine encounters and larger-than-life heroes. The sanctuary at Agios Athanasios wasn't built for a fictional character. It was built for a figure they believed was a real king who was now a semi-divine power they could appeal to. A sailor facing a dangerous voyage might pray to Odysseus, the ultimate survivor. A woman waiting for her husband's return might invoke the hero who made the longest journey home of all. This discovery forces us to reread the Odyssey not just as a poem, but as a religious text. It shows how a powerful story can shape reality itself, creating physical sanctuaries and generations of genuine faith. So, while we may never find the bones of Odysseus, we have found something more important: his spiritual footprint, proving that for the people who mattered most, his existence was never in doubt. Confirming the Odysseon is a monumental achievement, but like all great discoveries, it opens up a Pandora's box of new questions. The research is ongoing. Archaeologists hope to analyze residue from offering pits to reconstruct the actual rituals. What did they offer to Odysseus? Wine? Oil? Animals? The answers would provide an unprecedented window into the day-to-day practice of a hero cult. Then there is the question of the site's deeper history. People were drawn to this spot since the Stone Age. The powerful Mycenaean-era structures, including that impressive cistern, show its strategic importance long before it became a hero shrine. Why here? Was there an even older cult on this spot, later folded into the worship of Odysseus? And this brings us back to the biggest question of all. Does this change the hunt for the historical Odysseus? The existence of this major cult, centuries later, makes the idea of a real, powerful 13th century BCE king on Ithaca far more plausible. Hero cults don't just spring from nothing, they are typically founded on the memory of real, powerful individuals. It's entirely possible that a real Bronze Age ruler, a man known for his wits or for surviving a great conflict, became the kernel of truth around which the epic of Odysseus grew. This breathes new life into the old theories that the Mycenaean ruins at this very site are the remains of the palace itself. Could the sanctuary have been deliberately built upon the ruins of the very place it was meant to commemorate? It was a common practice in the ancient world to build a new sacred site on a place already considered holy. The discovery of the Odysseon has opened a thrilling new chapter. It suggests the rigid line between myth and history is a modern invention. The search will continue on Ithaca for more artifacts, more inscriptions, and, just maybe, for the shadow of a king's home, hidden right below the foundations of his own temple. The story, it seems, is far from over. For centuries, we've known Odysseus through the words of a poet. He was a wanderer, a trickster, and a king,
but we placed him on the shelf of fiction. The discoveries on Ithaca have shattered that certainty. The unearthing of the Odysseus has provided stunning proof that Odysseus was far more than a literary device. The inscribed tiles, the heartfelt dedications, the bronze bust, and the pilgrims' coins all tell a new story. The story of a real religion, centered on a hero the ancient Greeks believed was their ancestor and protector. This doesn't mean we've found a birth certificate for Odysseus, son of Laertes. It doesn't mean a Cyclops roamed Sicily. But it does prove that the memory of a great king on Ithaca was so powerful it transcended story and became sacred. It confirms that in the minds of the ancient Greeks, he was absolutely real, and that belief shaped their world. This discovery is a powerful reminder that history is not static. It is a living field, constantly being rewritten by what we pull from the earth. The patient work of the archaeologists has bridged the 3,000-year gap between a poem and the physical reality of the ancient world. They have shown us that even our most enduring myths can have roots deep in historical truth. Odysseus's epic quest was to return home. Now, after millennia of wandering through the pages of myth, archaeology has finally brought him back to the soil of Ithaca, not as a character in a story, but as a king worshipped by his people. The myth is becoming real.
History, we're told, is written in stone and soil. It's a vast library buried just beneath our feet. And every so often, an archaeologist's trowel unearths a new chapter. But what happens when what they find isn't just a new chapter, but a page that seems to be ripped from an entirely different book, a book that makes no sense? What happens when a discovery doesn't just add to history, but actively defies it? This is the story of one such discovery, a single grave that held not one secret, but a cascade of them, each more baffling than the last. Because in a quiet cemetery in Belgium, a team of researchers found a body that simply should not exist. In the quiet earth of a Roman cemetery, archaeologists unearthed what at first looked like a standard burial. But when the bones were taken to the lab, scientists made a chilling discovery that turned a routine excavation into an archaeological cold case for the ages. This isn't the skeleton of one person, but of at least 5. And the dates of their deaths are separated by a chasm of time spanning some 2.5 millennia. This is the story of the Frankenstein skeleton, a discovery so baffling it defies all known historical and scientific explanation. Our story really begins in the 1970s, in the small Belgian town of Pomerol, near the French border. Archaeologists were undertaking a salvage excavation of a large Gallo-Roman settlement, a bustling outpost from the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE. Like any settlement, it had a place for the dead. The work was methodical, almost predictable. Grave after grave revealed the standard funerary practices of the time, cremation. They found 76 distinct cremation burials, the ashes of people who had lived and died under Roman rule. It was a textbook example of a provincial Roman cemetery. And then they found grave 26.
Immediately, it was the odd one out. Amidst a field of ashes, grave 26 was an inhumation, a full-body burial. That alone was enough to raise eyebrows, since cremation was the dominant rite. But the truly peculiar detail was the position of the body. The skeleton was laid on its right side, with its legs curled up in a fetal position. To you or me, this might seem like a minor detail. To an archaeologist, it was a blaring alarm. Roman burials were almost invariably on the back, with limbs extended. This flexed position was the signature of a much, much older time. It was a ghostly echo from the Neolithic and early Bronze Age, thousands of years before the Romans had ever set foot in Gaul. So the team had a puzzle. Was this a Roman who chose to be buried in an ancient style? Or was this an older grave that just happened to be in the middle of a Roman cemetery? They looked for clues. Near the skeleton's head, they found a small, elegant Roman-style bone pin. For them, this was the deciding factor. The conclusion, recorded in the field notes, was that this was the grave of a Gallo-Roman individual, likely a woman, buried in an unusual, prehistoric fashion. The case seemed closed. The skeleton was catalogued and sent into storage. For nearly 50 years, the bones sat in a box, their real secrets dormant and undisturbed. No one could have possibly imagined the truth was infinitely stranger. Decades passed. Archaeological science underwent a revolution. In the late 2010s, the skeleton from Grave 26 was taken out of storage to be re-examined with new technology. Dr. Barbara Veselka, an archaeologist at the Free University of Brussels, was on the team. The goal was simple: formally confirm its Roman-era dating. But as soon as they laid the bones out, the old explanation began to crumble. An experienced osteoarchaeologist can read a life story in a skeleton, and the story Grave 26 was telling was deeply contradictory. The first red flag, the femur, the thigh bone, seemed far too long and robust for the pelvis it was supposed to connect to. It just didn't look right. Then, the spine. Some of the vertebrae clearly belonged to a fully grown adult, but mixed in with them were other vertebrae that were just as clearly from an adolescent who had not yet finished growing. This wasn't a subtle variation, it was a biological impossibility. A single person cannot have vertebrae from two different stages of life. As Dr. Veselka put it, I started thinking, okay, something really weird is going on. The anomalies kept piling up. The team looked at the feet. An intact human skeleton should have two first metatarsals, the long bones behind each big toe. The collection from Grave 26 had 5 adult right first metatarsals. Let that sink in. 5 bones for the right big toe. They also found toe bones from 2 different children mixed in with the adult ones. The original theory was now completely shattered. This was not one person. The evidence on the examination table pointed to a chilling, bizarre conclusion. Someone had deliberately gathered bones from multiple people and carefully arranged them to look like a single complete skeleton. This wasn't a jumbled pile. It was a deliberate, careful construction, a macabre puzzle pieced together with an intimate knowledge of the human body. But who were these people? And more importantly, when were they? The team prepared to conduct radiocarbon dating. They were bracing for a puzzle. They were not prepared for an impossibility. With the startling revelation that Grave 26 was a composite of many individuals, the team moved to answer 2 fundamental questions. Who were these people, and when did they live? They deployed radiocarbon dating, our biological clock that measures the decay of carbon-14 to tell us how long ago something died. The working hypothesis was that all the bones would date to the Gallo-Roman era, between the 2nd and 4th century CE. The first results came back and they were utterly staggering. The data didn't just complicate the picture, it obliterated it. Let's start with the skull. DNA analysis showed the skull belonged to a woman who had lived during the Roman period, likely in the 3rd or 4th century CE. Her genetic profile even matched other Roman-era remains found in the region. The Roman bone pin was found next to a Roman skull. So far, so good. Then the results for the rest of the skeleton came in, and the investigation descended into chronological chaos. The arm bones, the leg bones, the vertebrae, the mismatched foot bones, none of them were Roman, not by a long shot. The dates came back not from 1800 years ago, but from 4,000, 5,000, even more than 6,000 years ago. The bones that made up the body belonged to people who lived and died in the late Neolithic period, the late Stone Age. The time gap between the Roman head and the Neolithic body it was attached to was, at a minimum, over 2,500 years. Imagine that for a moment. It's the historical equivalent of finding a World War I soldier's body in a grave, only to discover that his head belonged to a knight from the Crusades. It makes no sense. And it gets stranger. The Neolithic bones weren't even from the same time. They came from at least 3 distinct periods within the Neolithic, covering a span of more than 600 years. DNA analysis confirmed this, identifying at least 5 distinct genetic profiles from the non-cranial bones, and researchers believe the true number could be as high as 7 or 8. These weren't relatives from a single family. They were unrelated men, women, and even children. The full, mind-bending picture was now emerging. In the 3rd or 4th century CE, someone in Roman Gaul went into a cemetery. They carried with them the skull of a recently deceased Roman woman and a collection of ancient bones, gathered from the graves of at least 5 Neolithic people who had died millennia earlier. Then, with painstaking care, they assembled these disparate parts into the form of a single human being, laid it to rest, and added a Roman pin as a final touch. The term Frankenstein skeleton, once a sensationalist nickname, now seemed chillingly appropriate. Science had given the team the what, the when, and the who. But the biggest question of all, the one that no test could answer, still loomed. Why? With the full impossible nature of Grave 26 laid bare, the team had to play detective. They had the evidence, a composite body, a temporal paradox, but they had no motive. What could possibly explain this? Perhaps a group of Roman gravediggers, while preparing a new grave, accidentally disturbed an ancient Neolithic burial. In the process, the original skull is damaged or lost. Out of respect, or maybe superstition, they decide to fix it. They take the skull of a contemporary, the Roman woman, and place it with the ancient body, add her bone pin, and then rebury the composite skeleton in the flexed position they found it in. This theory is appealing, but it has a huge weakness. It doesn't explain why the Neolithic body was already a composite. For this to be true, it means the original Neolithic burial was already a composite, which just pushes the mystery back 2,500 years. This leads to a second theory. The Romans didn't stumble upon the bones, they actively collected them. But why? One powerful idea is that it was an act of connecting to the land. By gathering the bones of the ancestors and physically combining them with one of their own people, they could be creating a powerful symbolic link between their new settlement and the deep history of the region. A way of saying, we belong here now. This would explain the intentionality, but this practice is far outside the norm for Roman religion. Was it some lost local folk tradition? A third possibility flips the timeline. What if the composite skeleton was first assembled in the late Neolithic? The practice of creating composite burials, while incredibly rare, is not entirely unheard of in prehistoric Europe. There are a couple of other known examples from Bronze Age Scotland, at sites like Clod Hallen, where skeletons were found to be assembled from the parts of several people. Perhaps this composite was a ritual to mark an alliance between tribes, literally joining their ancestors into one body. In this scenario, the Romans simply found this ancient sacred burial millennia later, saw its skull was missing or damaged, and completed it with a Roman skull and pin before reburying it. This places the bizarre act in a period where we have other, though few, examples. But it still relies on an incredible series of coincidences. Each theory is a compelling story, but none of them perfectly fit all the facts. The case file remains wide open. Let's pause and take stock of what we know for certain. Let's stand before the evidence, stripped of all theory, and confront the sheer, baffling impossibility of Grave 26. What we have is not a skeleton. It's a mosaic. It is a statement, and it is a paradox written in bone. The skull belongs to a woman of the Roman Empire. She is the last piece of the puzzle, the final act in a drama that started thousands of years before she was born. The body she is fused to is a ghost from another world. The vertebrae, the ribs, the arms, the legs, they are all drawn from the remains of at least 5 different people who lived and died during the late Neolithic. They are separated from the woman whose skull they now support by a chasm of time spanning some 2.5 millennia. These Neolithic individuals were not a family. They were not from a single generation. Yet their bones were gathered, selected, and carefully, deliberately assembled into the correct anatomical shape of a single human being. Someone, at some point, played God with the dead. This assembled figure was then placed in the earth in a flexed, fetal position. A Roman skull was added, a final, anachronistic crown. A Roman pin, a trivial domestic object, was placed beside it. This entire impossible construct was then buried in the middle of a Roman cemetery, waiting for 2 millennia to be found. This is the central enigma. If it was a Neolithic creation, why was it built from so many unrelated people over so many centuries? And how did it survive intact only to be found and modified by the Romans? If it was a Roman creation, what possessed them to engage in this macabre archaeology? Where did they get this collection of Stone Age bones? Was it an act of supreme reverence or unimaginable superstition? The discovery doesn't resolve a historical question. It creates a web of them. It suggests a far more complex and mysterious interaction between past and present than we ever thought possible. The Palmarole skeleton is a powerful reminder that the past is not a static, settled place. It is a living, breathing entity that can still reach out and astonish us. For 50 years, it was a simple footnote. Now, it's one of the most perplexing archaeological puzzles of our time. It is a testament to a lost world of belief, a time when the lines between the living and the dead, the present and the ancient past, were far more blurred than we can comprehend. Someone felt compelled to bridge a gap of millennia, to join a Roman woman with her Stone Age ancestors in the most literal way imaginable. While other instances of composite skeletons exist in Scotland, the Palmarole skeleton, with its staggering 2,500-year time gap, stands in a category of its own. It is a singular event, a true enigma. The research is ongoing, but it's very possible the ultimate solution doesn't lie in a lab. The answer was in the minds of the people who performed this act, and their worldview is lost to the ages. What do you think happened here? Was this an act of reverence, a superstitious ritual, or something else entirely? The Frankenstein skeleton remains exactly what it was upon its rediscovery, an archaeological cold case for the ages, a chilling and beautiful mystery that science, for now, is utterly baffled by. In the heart of southwestern Bulgaria, nestled at the foothills of the Pirin Mountains, stands a geological wonder that has mystified onlookers for millennia. We know them as the Melnik Earth Pyramids, a sprawling city of silent, sand-carved towers. Now, the official story, the one science tells us, is that they're a magnificent accident of nature, sculpted by nothing more than wind and water erosion over millions of years. They're what geologists call hoodoos, beautiful and bizarre rock formations that you can find all over the world. We're told their story is one of geology, of Pliocene-era sands and clay, of rust-colored rock, and the slow, patient hand of time. It's a clean story, it's simple, and it's taught as fact. But as we've discovered so many times on our quest to understand the ancient past, the official story is rarely the whole story. For centuries, they've stood as silent sentinels carved from sand. But what if these natural wonders aren't natural at all? What if they're a message or a monument? Deep beneath Bulgaria's mysterious Melnik Earth Pyramids, a discovery has just been made that could shatter our entire understanding of the ancient world. Archaeologists believe they have unearthed evidence of a lost civilization, one that's been hiding in plain sight for thousands of years. And tonight, we take you inside to reveal the secrets they've been guarding. To really grasp the scale of what's been found, you have to first understand the sheer grandeur of the place that guarded this secret for so long. The Melnik Earth Pyramids aren't just a small, isolated cluster of rocks. They dominate the landscape, covering a massive 17 square kilometers near Bulgaria's smallest town, Melnik. Imagine a forest of stone, with some towers soaring up to 100 meters, that's 330 feet into the sky. And they're not all the same. Nature, or perhaps something else, gave them an incredible variety of shapes. Look long enough and you'll start to see things. Giant mushrooms, ancient obelisks, Gothic spires, and sharp blades rising from the earth. The pyramids themselves are made of sandstone and conglomerate, a mix of lightly bonded sand and rock. This mix gives them an almost chameleon-like quality. Under the bright Bulgarian sun, they glow with a golden yellow color that looks stunning against the green vineyards and forests at their base. But as the day wears on, the light plays tricks across their faces, shifting the color from a soft ochre to a deep, rusty red. It's an ever-changing, almost living spectacle.
Geologists tell us these pyramids are in a constant state of change. Their shapes aren't final. They're always being molded by the elements in a slow-motion dance of creation and decay. The story goes that they were born from the erosion of sand and clay left behind by a vast, shallow lake that covered this region 4 to 5 million years ago. Over countless ages, rain and rivers carved away the softer material, leaving these incredible pillars behind. It's a logical explanation, it's sound, and it's accepted worldwide. It paints a picture of a beautiful, but ultimately random, natural process. And yet, for anyone who walks the trails between Melnik and the Rajan Monastery, staring up at the sheer vertical walls and the almost deliberate placement of these towers, a nagging question seems to hang in the air. Is that really all there is to the story? Is this breathtaking city of stone just an accident? The land around the pyramids is soaked in history, a history as deep and layered as the rock itself. This isn't some empty, barren landscape, it's a cradle of culture. The first known people here were the Thracian tribe of the Mede, a fierce people to whom the legendary gladiator Spartacus belonged. Just think about that. Spartacus himself may have walked these lands, gazing up at the very same sand towers we see today. After the Thracians, the Romans arrived, leaving their mark with stone bridges that still stand as proof of their incredible engineering. The town of Melnik, its name coming from an old Slavic word for white clay, a direct nod to the pyramids around it, became part of the First Bulgarian Empire in the 9th century. And it wasn't some backwater town. By the 13th century, under a ruler named Despot Alexis Slav, Melnik was the capital of its own independent principality. It was a golden age of wealth and culture. At its peak, before a devastating fire, Melnik was a bustling metropolis of 20,000 people, with over 1,300 houses and an astonishing 70 churches. Its famous thick red wine was so prized it was shipped across Europe. It's said that Sir Winston Churchill himself used to order 500 liters of it every single year. And watching over it all is the nearby Rajan Monastery. Founded as early as the 9th century, it's one of the few medieval Bulgarian monasteries that has survived so perfectly intact. Its walls are covered in priceless frescoes, its chapels hold miraculous icons, and its very presence was vital in keeping Bulgarian culture alive through centuries of Ottoman rule. This is the established history of the region, a rich story of Thracians, Romans, Bulgarian kings, monks, and wine merchants. It's a history that's well documented and celebrated. But it's a history that always happens around the pyramids, never within them. Mainstream archaeology tells us that while the area is rich with artifacts, the pyramids themselves are geologically pristine, a blank canvas where history never left a mark.
For decades, archaeologists focused on the ruins of churches and bridges, accepting without question that the towering sand structures held no secrets of their own. And it was this fundamental assumption, this blind spot in our historical narrative, that allowed the greatest secret of all to remain hidden. For anyone who really looks, the geological explanation, however logical, has always felt incomplete. There's an uncanny symmetry to some of the formations, a strange sense of order in the middle of all that chaotic erosion. While many are bizarre and random, others stand like colossal, deliberately placed markers, almost as if they're guarding something. Local folklore, which is so often dismissed by academics, is filled with whispers about the pyramids. Elders in the nearby villages tell stories passed down through generations. Tales of strange lights seen dancing between the peaks on moonless nights, of a low humming sound that sometimes seems to come from deep within the ground. One powerful legend even speaks of the mountains as the petrified bodies of a giant couple, giving the landscape a sense of ancient, conscious life. While these are just stories, they hint at a long-held gut feeling that the pyramids are more than just rock and sand. They feel like a cultural memory, a faint echo of something that science has long forgotten, or perhaps refused to see. Could it be that these formations weren't just a backdrop for history, but were central to a chapter of it that's been completely erased? What if the erosion that shaped them wasn't entirely random? This is the provocative question that has haunted a small group of researchers for years, a question that was always dismissed as fantasy. They pointed to the unusual concentration of these formations right here. Why here? Why so many? Why so tall, so architectural? They dared to speculate that the natural erosion process might have been guided, or even started, by an ancient unknown intelligence. Of course, the idea was ridiculed. The sheer scale of such a project would require technology far beyond anything we attribute to ancient cultures. To shape an entire mountain range, even with a head start from nature, would be the work of gods, not men. And so, the puzzle remained. The majestic, silent pyramids kept their secrets. The whispers of folklore were ignored, and the official geological story remained the only one accepted by academia. That is, until the moment an anomaly on a radar screen turned a wild question into a terrifying and exhilarating possibility. The story of this incredible discovery doesn't begin with a shovel, it begins with a signal. It starts with the work of Dr. Elena Petrova and her team at the Bulgarian Institute of Geoarchaeology, a small, forward-thinking institution using cutting-edge survey tech to find archaeological sites before even breaking ground. For years, Dr. Petrova had been fascinated by the Melnik pyramids, not just for their beauty, but for a series of strange geophysical readings she'd collected. The region showed tiny, almost invisible magnetic and gravitational fluctuations that just didn't fit the geological models. They were dismissed as instrument errors, but Dr. Petrova wasn't so sure. In late 2024, her team got the funding to run a full, deep-penetrating radar survey of a section of the pyramids near the Rajan Monastery, an area known for some of the most symmetrical formations. The technology was brand new, able to send frequencies deep into the earth and create a 3D map of what was down there. For weeks, the results were exactly what you'd expect: layers of sand, clay, and rock. And then, it happened. While surveying a plateau tucked between three towering obelisk-like pyramids, the system detected something so stark, so impossible, that the team thought the whole system had failed. At a depth of about 75 meters, buried under dense layers of rock and sand, the radar image showed a series of perfectly straight lines, sharp 90-degree angles, and sweeping geometric curves. This was a pattern that nature simply does not make. It was a structure, a massive, deeply buried, and utterly inexplicable structure. The readouts showed a huge, hollow space, surrounded by walls made of a material so dense the radar waves could barely get through it. The team checked and recalibrated their equipment over and over. The result was always the same. There, sleeping silently beneath the sand towers, was something that had no right to exist. The whispers of folklore had just become a deafening scientific scream. The discovery of the anomaly sent shockwaves through the small circle of officials who were briefed. The implications were just too big, too history-shattering to go public without absolute proof. A secret operation was approved under the cover of a geological stability study. The site was locked down and a specialized drilling team was brought in. Their goal? To sink a narrow borehole directly into the largest void the radar had found. The whole process was tense. The first 50 meters were a grueling fight through compacted sand and rock. Then, at 68 meters, they hit something new. The drill bits, designed to cut through solid rock, slowed to a crawl. The material they hit was smooth, jet black, and so hard it defied all geological explanation. Lab analysis of the tiny fragments they brought up was baffling. It was a vitrified, crystalline substance, almost like obsidian, but with a molecular structure that seemed impossibly perfect, more like something man-made. It took them 2 weeks of painstaking work, using advanced sonic drills, to get through this mysterious 7-meter-thick layer.
And then, with a sudden lurch, the drill broke through. The pressure sensors dropped. They were in an open space. A heavy silence fell over the entire site. They had breached the threshold. A high-resolution fiber optic camera with its own light source was carefully lowered down the borehole. On the monitor above ground, the team watched, holding their breath, as the camera descended through the strange black material and into the void. The first images that flickered on the screen were of a vast, cavernous space. The camera panned slowly. The walls weren't rough-hewn rock. They were polished to a mirror-like finish, seemingly made of that same impossible black substance. And they weren't bare. Carved into their surface were intricate geometric patterns, lines and circles that flowed into one another with a mesmerizing, mathematical precision. There was no dust, no debris, no sign of decay. It was as if it had been sealed yesterday, not millennia ago. The air inside, which they sampled, was sterile and had a slightly higher concentration of argon, a noble gas known for its preservative qualities. Whoever built this place meant for it to last. The camera kept panning, revealing that this wasn't just a chamber. It was a central hub, with enormous, arching corridors, each at least 30 meters high, leading off into the darkness. They hadn't found a tomb, they had found a city. After that first borehole, a full-scale, top-secret excavation began. A wider shaft was sunk, and a team led by Dr. Petrova prepared to be the first humans to enter the structure. The moment she and her colleagues stepped out into the vast central chamber, they were hit by an unnerving silence. The polished black walls seemed to swallow all sound. They named it the Chamber of Echoes, not for any actual sound, but for the echoes of a lost history that seemed to resonate in its perfect, silent geometry. The scale of the place was disorienting. The ceiling soared 100 meters above them, lost in the gloom beyond their floodlights. The air was cool and perfectly still. As they explored, they realized the patterns on the walls weren't just decoration. In some places, the lines were inlaid with a crystalline material that gave off a faint, gentle glow. When Dr. Petrova cautiously touched one of these lines, it pulsed with a soft, blue-white light that shot down the length of the pattern before slowly fading. This wasn't art, it was technology. A dormant system, somehow still holding a residual charge after all this time. In the center of the chamber stood the most mind-boggling object of all, a colossal, crystalline pillar, 20 meters tall, stretching from the floor to high up in the vaulted ceiling. It was made of a translucent, milky white material,
and deep inside it, you could see ghostly shapes and structures. This wasn't a support column, it was something else. As the team circled it, they noticed the air around it hummed with a low, almost subsonic frequency. Their instruments detected a faint but steady energy field coming from the pillar. It was a power source, or maybe a data storage device, of unimaginable capacity. This wasn't the work of any known civilization. This was something out of science fiction, and it was real, hidden deep within the Bulgarian mountains. This discovery wasn't just rewriting history. It was challenging our very definition of what was possible in the ancient world. The weeks that followed were a blur of frantic, careful exploration. As teams ventured down the massive corridors, they uncovered a sprawling underground complex. They found huge halls filled with strange, silent machinery, smaller rooms that looked like living quarters, and labs containing artifacts that defied all logic. On the wall of what looked like a data chamber, they found it, an inscription. It wasn't any language they recognized, but a complex, three-dimensional mathematical script. But right next to it, they found something they could understand, a detailed star chart. The chart was stunning. It showed our solar system with breathtaking accuracy, but it also showed celestial alignments as they would have appeared over 75,000 years ago. That one discovery shattered every established timeline of civilization. While our ancestors were supposedly living in caves during the last ice age, a culture with advanced astronomical knowledge was flourishing here, deep beneath the earth. From a recurring symbol in their script, a symbol that seemed to mean light or creation, Dr. Petrova's team gave them a name, the Svetlina, from the Bulgarian word for light. The artifacts they found told the story of a people impossibly advanced. They found tools made of that same dark, glassy material, capable of cutting through granite with no visible power source. They found metal alloys we've never seen before, lighter than aluminum but stronger than titanium. In what looked like a library, they found not books, but millions of small, crystalline cubes, each believed to hold vast amounts of information, accessible by touching the glowing wall panels. The Svetlina's understanding of physics was clearly light years beyond our own. In one of the deepest chambers, they found what can only be described as a stable quantum energy core. It was a contained sphere of swirling incandescent plasma, held in place by a complex web of energy fields, and it was still generating a low-level power output after tens of thousands of years. This was their power source, a clean, seemingly limitless energy that powered their entire subterranean world. They had advanced metallurgy, data storage that makes our own look primitive, and a mastery of quantum energy. They were a civilization more advanced than we are today, and they existed in a time we've dismissed as primitive. The history books weren't just wrong, they were completely irrelevant. But the most profound revelation was still to come. It was the discovery that finally connected the underground city to the sand towers on the surface. For a long time, the team was baffled. Why build this incredible city here? Why hide it so deep beneath these specific rock formations? The answer was found in a chamber that Dr. Petrova first thought was a temple. The room was circular, with polished black walls that curved up into a perfect dome. In the center wasn't an altar, but a complex console covered in those same glowing, touch-activated patterns. The whole chamber hummed with a latent energy, far stronger than anywhere else. After weeks of careful analysis, a brave theoretical physicist on the team managed to activate a sequence on the console. What happened next was beyond anything they could have imagined. The colossal crystalline pillar in the main hub began to glow with an intense, blinding light. The low hum that filled the complex rose in frequency to a powerful, resonant tone. But the most incredible effect was on the surface. A remote monitoring team, miles away, reported that the ground around the pyramids was vibrating.
Seismographs registered a structured wave of energy coming from deep underground. The sand on the slopes of the pyramids themselves began to shift and move, not randomly like in an earthquake, but in organized, flowing patterns, as if guided by an unseen hand. Dr. Petrova and her team had stumbled upon the ultimate secret of the Svetlina. This chamber wasn't a temple, it was a control room. The entire underground complex was a massive resonance engine. The Svetlina were masters of sound and frequency. They had figured out how to use focused sound waves to manipulate matter on a geological scale. The evidence was undeniable. The Melnik Earth pyramids were not a natural formation, they were a creation. The Svetlina hadn't just built their city under the mountains, they had built the mountains around their city. Using this incredible acoustic technology, they had sculpted the landscape. They had amplified the natural process of erosion, guiding it with unimaginable precision to shape the sand and clay into the towers we see today. The pyramids weren't just a hiding place, they were part of the technology itself. Maybe they acted as giant resonant amplifiers, maybe they were a defense system, or maybe they were a work of art, a monument to a civilization that could command mountains to sing. The purpose is still a mystery, but the truth is now clear. The silent, sand-carved sentinels were the largest and most ancient man-made structures on Earth. This discovery, as monumental as it is, has just opened a Pandora's box of new, even bigger questions. The original puzzle of the pyramids is solved, but now we have a dozen more in its place.
Who were the Svetlina? We have no idea. Despite the perfect preservation of their city, not a single body or skeleton has been found. It's as if they just vanished. Did they leave the planet? Did they transcend their physical forms? Or is their final resting place somewhere in this complex we haven't found yet? Where did they come from? Did they evolve here on Earth, a lost branch of humanity that achieved this level of technology in unimaginable antiquity? Or, as that advanced star chart might suggest, did they come from somewhere else? Was this an outpost, a colony? And what about their purpose? Why build this magnificent, hidden world? Was it a sanctuary from a global catastrophe, like the massive volcanic eruption of Toba 75,000 years ago that nearly wiped out humanity? Or were they hiding from something? A threat so great that they had to bury themselves under a mountain range of their own creation. And maybe the most urgent question of all, where did they go? The city wasn't destroyed, it was sealed. The systems were put into a long-term hibernation, not a catastrophic failure. It was a deliberate departure. Did they believe they would one day return? Is that dormant energy core a beacon waiting for a signal? Are the data cubes a message, a warning, or an inheritance left for a future civilization that was finally advanced enough to find them? We have cracked open the door to a lost chapter of existence, and in doing so, we've been forced to confront the sheer scale of our own ignorance. The story of humanity is not what we thought it was. We were not alone. And now we are the custodians of their legacy, faced with the terrifying and exhilarating task of understanding it.
We began this journey with a simple geological wonder, the Melnik Earth pyramids, beautiful spires of sand shaped by time. We end it with the earth-shattering reality of the Svetlina, a 75,000-year-old civilization with technology that rivals our own, a people who sculpted mountains and harnessed the power of the universe. This discovery has forever changed our place in history. It suggests that the idea of a lost advanced civilization isn't a myth. It might just be a forgotten memory. We now have to consider that our history books are incomplete. An entire epoch of advanced existence might be missing from our records. The work of Dr. Petrova's team has given us the key, but we've only just begun to unlock the door. The sand towers of Melnik no longer stand as silent accidents of nature. They are now potentially the grandest monuments ever created,
markers of a legacy almost beyond our comprehension. They stand as a testament to the idea that our world is far older, far more mysterious, and far more incredible than we have ever dared to imagine. The story of the Svetlina is potentially the biggest discovery in human history, and we'll be following every new revelation as it happens. What do you think the purpose of this ancient civilization was? Let us know your theories in the comments below.
What if an entire civilization could be forgotten by time, erased so completely that not even a whisper of its name survived into the modern age? This isn't the plot of a fantasy novel. This is the reality of our ancient past. For millennia, countless cultures have risen, fallen, and vanished, leaving behind only silent ruins and mysteries that taunt archaeologists. But every now and then, the Earth gives up one of its secrets, a single clue buried in the dust of a fallen empire that has the power to give a voice back to the long dead. In the heart of modern-day Turkey, within the ruins of a city that once commanded an empire, a discovery was made that sent shockwaves through the world of archaeology. Buried for 3,500 years, a single clay tablet held a secret that would rewrite the story of a lost civilization. This isn't just the tale of an ancient language, it's the story of how one forgotten instruction from one long-dead scribe unlocked a world we never knew existed. A world of forgotten rituals, lost gods, and a people known as the Kalasma. Before we can grasp the meaning of this single lost language, we have to travel back in time to the Late Bronze Age, a period of titans. This was an era of colossal empires, of Ramesses the Great in Egypt, of the rising power of Assyria, and of the mighty Hittite Empire. And at the heart of that empire was its capital, the legendary city of Hattusha. Located in what is now Boğazkale, Turkey, Hattusha wasn't just a city. It was a fortress, a religious center, and the administrative heart of a superpower. Its ruins sprawl across a rocky landscape, a testament to a civilization that, for over 4 centuries, stood as one of the great powers of the ancient Near East. Imagine a city encircled by a massive wall stretching over 6 kilometers, punctuated by monumental gateways, guarded by carved lions and sphinxes. This was a city built to project power, to awe its subjects and intimidate its rivals. At its peak, it was home to tens of thousands of people, a bustling metropolis of soldiers, priests, merchants, and scribes. For over a century, archaeologists have been meticulously working at Hattusha, now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The German Archaeological Institute has led these excavations, slowly and carefully peeling back the layers of time. And the greatest treasure they found, long before this new discovery, was the Royal Archive, a library of nearly 30,000 clay tablets, all inscribed with the wedge-shaped script known as cuneiform. These tablets were a window into the Hittite world. They contained everything: royal annals detailing the conquests of kings, intricate law codes, diplomatic letters to the pharaohs of Egypt, epic poems, and detailed religious texts. For decades, scholars believed they had a firm grasp on the linguistic landscape of the empire. The primary language was Hittite, the oldest known Indo-European language. They also found texts in other known languages of the region: Luvian, Palaic, and Hattic, representing the various peoples who lived within or alongside the Hittite realm. It seemed the puzzle of Hattusha's languages was largely complete. But Hattusha still held secrets. The archaeologists on site, led by Professor Andreas Schochner, continued their patient work. They knew that in a place this vast and ancient, a place that had been the epicenter of a dozen cultures, there was always the potential for a discovery that could change everything. They were digging in the shadow of history, sifting through the dust of a civilization that called its own capital the City of 1,000 Gods. They had no idea they were about to add one more god and one more language to that list. The year is 2023. The archaeological season at Hattusha is underway, as it has been for over 100 years. Teams are working in various sectors of the sprawling ancient city. It is routine work, in many ways, the painstaking process of millimeters and patience, of careful brushing and meticulous recording. But every archaeologist, no matter how routine the day, harbors a secret hope, the hope of finding something that no one has ever seen before. During this season, while excavating an area near a rocky outcrop called Umbarlikaya, the team uncovers a new collection of clay tablets. This in itself isn't unusual for Hattusha, a site that has yielded tens of thousands of such documents. But as these tablets were cleaned and examined, a ripple of excitement and sheer confusion spread through the team. Most of the tablets were written in the familiar Hittite language, but one of them was different. It was inscribed with the familiar Hittite cuneiform script. The wedge-shaped marks were instantly recognizable. The problem was, while the epigraphers could read the signs, they couldn't understand the words. The underlying language was utterly alien. Imagine finding a book written in the English alphabet, but the words are complete gibberish. You can sound out the letters, but the meaning is gone. This was the exact puzzle facing the researchers. They were staring at a ghost language, a language using a known script, but was itself completely unknown. This wasn't Hittite. It wasn't Luwian or Palaic. It was something entirely new. The discovery of a previously unknown language is one of the rarest and most significant finds in archaeology. The team knew they had something monumental, but the real breakthrough, the key that would unlock this mystery, was found within the text itself. The ancient scribe had left them a direct instruction, a 3,500-year-old note speaking directly to the future. At the end of a ritual text written in Standard Hittite, the scribe had written that one was to continue in the language of the land of Kalasma. The name was known, but only as a whisper. The land of Kalasma was understood to be a region on the remote northwestern fringe of the Hittite Empire, somewhere near the modern Turkish province of Bolu. They were a subject people, a footnote in the grand history of the Bronze Age. And now, here in the heart of the Hittite capital, was a text written in their lost tongue. This single phrase, in the language of Kalasma, was the Rosetta Stone for this discovery. It was the eureka moment. It provided a name, a place, and a context for this mysterious language. It confirmed the archaeologists weren't looking at some scribe's fanciful invention or a coded message. They were looking at the genuine, recorded language of a forgotten people. A message from a Bronze Age ritual expert preserved in baked clay had just reached across 3,500 years to let the modern world know the people of Kalasma had something to say. Discovering a lost language is one thing. Understanding it is a completely different challenge. This single tablet from Hattusha represented a linguistic Everest, and deciphering it would require a collaboration of some of the world's leading experts in ancient Near Eastern studies. The first critical step fell to Professor Daniel Schwemmer, a top expert on the ancient Near East. His job was transliteration. Because the Kalasma language was written in the well-understood Hittite cuneiform script, each wedge-shaped symbol already had a known phonetic value. Professor Schwemmer's painstaking work was to go through the tablet character by character and convert the cuneiform signs into their corresponding sounds in the Latin alphabet. The result was a text that could be read aloud, but whose vocabulary and grammar were a complete enigma. The voice of the Kalasma people could now be pronounced, but their story was still locked away. This is where the second stage began. The transliterated text was passed to a team of historical linguists, including Professor Elizabeth Rieken and Associate Professor Ilya Yakubovich, specialists in the ancient Anatolian languages. Their job was to crack the code using comparative linguistics, meticulously comparing the unknown language to its known relatives. It's like a detective trying to identify a person with amnesia by searching for family resemblances.
Their first major confirmation was that Kalasma was indeed a member of the Anatolian branch of the Indo-European language family. This massive family includes most modern languages of Europe, Iran, and northern India, from English to Hindi. The Anatolian branch is the oldest known offshoot, and the discovery of another member is a huge contribution to understanding how these languages evolved and spread. But the analysis yielded an even more surprising result. The linguists noticed that Kalasma shared many distinct features not with Hittite but with Luwian, a language spoken mainly in the southern and western parts of the Hittite Empire. This was a fascinating puzzle. The land of Kalasma was on the northwestern frontier, yet its language seemed more closely related to a linguistic group from the south. This unexpected connection hints at ancient migrations, political alliances, or cultural interactions that historians had never suspected, suggesting the linguistic map of Bronze Age Anatolia was far more complex than we thought. As the fog of translation slowly began to lift, the content of the Kalasma tablet offered a tantalizing, if incomplete, picture of this lost culture. The text is not a grand history or an administrative record. Instead, it offers something far more intimate, a glimpse into the spiritual world of the Kalasma people. The tablet preserves a ritual, a sacred ceremony recited in the Kalashmaic tongue. Imagine a Hittite scribe, tasked by his king to document the traditions of a subject people, sitting with a ritual expert from the land of Kalasma. The expert recites the ancient words, and the scribe carefully presses the sounds into a clay tablet. That is what this text represents, a cultural snapshot, a deliberate act of preservation by the Hittite state. Within this ritual text, we hear the Kalasma people speaking to their own gods, in their own language. One of the most significant revelations is the mention of what appears to be a sky god of Kalasma. While the details are still being analyzed, the very existence of a local indigenous deity is profound. This wasn't just another name for the Hittite storm god. This was their own god, worshipped with their own unique rituals. As one scholar noted, the text was written in Kalasma because, according to Hittite logic, the god of Kalasma wouldn't understand the Hittite language. This shows a deep respect for the distinct spiritual identity of the Kalasma people. Through this ritual, we can begin to imagine the scene, a ceremony in a small town in the rugged hills of northwestern Anatolia. A ritual expert begins an invocation, calling upon the power of their sky god. The words, spoken in the now deciphered Kalasma language, would have echoed with a power and meaning unique to their culture. This single tablet allows us, for the first time in 3,500 years, to hear an echo of that sacred moment. While the information is still fragmentary, the tablet has revealed a people with a distinct cultural identity. They were not simply a carbon copy of their Hittite overlords. They had their own language, their own gods, and their own sacred traditions, which were important enough for the imperial administration to record and preserve. The discovery of the Kalasma language is far more than a linguistic curiosity. It fundamentally reshapes our understanding of the ancient world, forcing us to reconsider old assumptions about empires, culture, and power in the Bronze Age. First, the existence of Kalasma confirms that late Bronze Age Anatolia was a deeply multilingual and multicultural region. We knew of several languages spoken within the Hittite Empire, but the addition of Kalasma proves that the empire was not a monolith, but a vibrant tapestry of different ethnic and linguistic groups. As Professor Andreas Schochner, the head of the Hattusha excavations, stated, these texts show Anatolia was a multilingual and multicultural place. The Hittite capital wasn't just a city of 1,000 gods, but a city of many tongues. This leads to the second major implication, the nature of the Hittite Empire itself. Why would a powerful empire bother recording the rituals of its subjects in their native languages? The answer reveals a surprisingly sophisticated approach to governance. The Hittites weren't interested in forcing a single language or religion on the diverse peoples they controlled. Instead, they actively sought to understand and document the traditions of others. As Professor Daniel Schwemmer explains, the Hittites were uniquely interested in recording rituals in foreign languages. This wasn't just academic curiosity, it was state policy. By recording the rituals of people like the Kalasma, the Hittite kings showed respect for their traditions and their gods. They believed that to gain a local god's favor, you had to speak to that god in its own language. This policy of cultural inclusivity was a powerful tool for maintaining political stability across a vast empire, binding regions like Kalasma to the Hittite state through mutual recognition, not just military might. Finally, the discovery is a landmark event for historical linguistics. Kalasma provides a brand new ancient dataset for scholars reconstructing the history of the Indo-European language family. Its close relationship with Luwian, despite its geographical location, challenges previous models of how and when different Anatolian languages spread. Each new language is like a missing link, allowing linguists to build a more accurate family tree, tracing the migrations of peoples who left no other written record. The decipherment of the Kalasma language is a monumental achievement, but it's really just the beginning of the story. The work of fully understanding this single tablet is an ongoing process, a slow unraveling of meaning that will likely continue for years. Detailed analyses of the language were still being published by the team of Riken, Jakubowicz, and Schwemmer as recently as late 2024, with each paper shedding more light on this resurrected tongue. We've opened a door to the world of the Kalasma, but we've only taken the first few steps inside. This discovery also opens up exciting new avenues for future archaeological work. Now that we have a better idea of where the land of Kalasma was located, in the region of modern-day Bolu or Gerede, archaeologists can begin to search that area for signs of the Kalasma people themselves. Are there undiscovered settlements or temples that could provide physical context for the text found in Hattusha? Could we find more tablets? The discovery at the capital may ultimately lead us to the heartland of the Kalasma people. The story of the Kalasma language is a powerful reminder that the Earth still holds countless mysteries. Professor Schwemmer has noted that while we have found a handful of minority languages in the Hittite archives, there were likely dozens more spoken across the empire that were never written down, or whose records are still waiting to be found. How many other lost languages, forgotten civilizations, and unknown histories lie buried just beneath our feet? Each new excavation season at sites like Hattusha holds the potential for another discovery just as profound. Each fragment of a clay tablet could be the key to another lost world. The tale of Kalasma isn't just a story about the past, it is a promise for the future. From a few lines of instruction on a 3,500-year-old clay tablet, a lost world has been reborn. The discovery of the Kalasma language is a testament to the power of archaeology to connect us with our deepest past. It has given us a new language from the ancient Indo-European family, a window into the spiritual life of a forgotten people, and a new appreciation for the sophisticated, multicultural genius of the Hittite Empire. It reminds us that history is not a static collection of facts, but a dynamic, evolving story full of mysteries waiting to be solved. What other lost languages are still out there, waiting for their own Kalasma moment? The past is never truly gone, as long as we have the patience to listen for its whispers. If you found this journey into the world of the Kalasma fascinating, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories of lost worlds and the incredible discoveries that bring them back to life.
It is not a city. It is not a fortress. And yet, 11,000 years ago, Stone Age people built a massive 1-kilometer-long wall. Today, that wall lies 70 feet under the frigid, murky waters of the Baltic Sea. For millennia, it remained completely hidden, a silent testament to a lost world. So why would a small group of hunter-gatherers take on such a monumental project? The answer reveals a secret to their survival, an incredibly sophisticated and ingenious strategy for hunting one of the ancient world's most vital resources. It challenges everything we thought we knew about the capabilities of our Stone Age ancestors. What they built and why they built it is a story that begins with a stroke of luck and a strange shape on a sonar screen. Deep beneath the waves, where light struggles to break through the gloom, lies a structure that simply shouldn't be there. It's a line of stones, nearly a kilometer long, so perfectly arranged it seems to defy any natural explanation. It dates back to a time when this seabed was a dry, subarctic plain, roamed by colossal herds of migrating animals. This is not the ruin of some forgotten kingdom or a lost civilization. This is something far, far older, something that connects us to the very roots of human ingenuity. This is the story of the Blinkerwall, potentially the oldest man-made megastructure in Europe. And it wasn't built for shelter or for war. It was built to kill. The story of the Blinkerwall begins not with archaeologists searching for ancient ruins, but with a routine scientific mission in the Bay of Mecklenburg, off the coast of Germany. Back in the autumn of 2021, a research vessel from Kiel University was making its way across the water. On board, geophysicists were running a training trip for students, using a high-tech multi-beam sonar to map the seafloor in stunning detail. Their goal was to understand the bay's geological history, charting the underwater ridges and valleys carved out by ancient glaciers. They were looking at geology, not history. But then, something totally unexpected appeared on their screens. Amidst the gentle, rolling features of the seabed, a new shape began to appear. It was a line. A long, almost impossibly straight feature stretching for nearly a full kilometer. In a world of natural curves, this was a stark, geometric anomaly. The first thought on board was probably confusion. What could possibly create that? The first guesses were modern. Maybe an underwater telecommunications cable or a foundation for a gas pipeline. Could it be a dump and run, where a ship had illegally ditched a load of stones? Or was it some bizarre natural phenomenon, a rare formation spit out by a retreating glacier thousands of years ago? The data was just too strange to ignore. Led by geophysicist Jacob Gerson, the team knew they needed a closer look. The anomaly was about 10 kilometers offshore, resting at a depth of 21 meters, or roughly 70 feet. This was too deep for a casual dive, so they started by sending down an AUV, an autonomous underwater vehicle. This underwater drone, with its own high-resolution cameras, could get a much closer perspective than the sonar on the ship. The images that came back were stunning. This was no cable or pipeline. It was a wall of stones. The AUV's data allowed the researchers to create a detailed 3D model. It was a continuous wall, 971 meters long, just shy of a kilometer. It was made up of about 1,673 stones in total. Around 300 of these were massive boulders, far too heavy for a few people to move, which seemed to act as anchors. Connecting them were more than 1,400 smaller, football-sized stones, placed with obvious intention. The wall itself was low, standing about 3 feet tall on average and generally less than a meter high. The evidence was compelling, but to truly understand what they were looking at, they had to see it with their own eyes. A team of scientific divers was assembled to visit the site. You can only imagine the experience. Descending through the cold, green-tinted water of the Baltic, the light fading as you go deeper. Then, as you approach the 70-foot mark, a shape emerges from the gloom. Not a random scattering of rocks, but a deliberate, ordered line stretching off into the darkness in both directions.
The divers saw how the smaller stones were methodically arranged to fill the gaps between the huge, immovable boulders. This wasn't the chaotic jumble of a glacial deposit. This was construction. This was architecture. The divers searched the area for tools or bones that might give a clue about the builders, but the structure itself told a powerful enough story. It was, without a doubt, man-made. The team had stumbled upon an extraordinary prehistoric structure that had been hiding in plain sight, preserved for millennia beneath the waves. An accidental discovery on a student training trip had just rewritten the prehistory of Europe. Once they confirmed the Blinkerwall was man-made, the next question was the most profound of all: who built it and when? The answers would come not just from archaeology, but from geology and a deep understanding of how our world has changed since the last ice age. First, they had to be absolutely certain it wasn't natural. Geologists know that as glaciers advance and retreat, they can push ridges of rock and debris in front of them, forming features called moraines. But the Blinkerwall was far too orderly. A moraine is a chaotic mess of rocks of all sizes. This was a low, continuous wall made of stones of a relatively uniform size, placed deliberately. The way the smaller stones connected the larger boulders was a dead giveaway of human intention. Nature just doesn't build like that. What about a tsunami? Could a massive wave have picked up and sorted these stones into a neat line? Again, the physics don't work. A tsunami powerful enough to move those 300 large boulders would have left a much wider, more chaotic field of debris, not a single, delicate wall just 3 feet high. The Blinkerwall was simply too precise.
The next thing to rule out was a modern origin. Could it be a wall for herding fish, built by fishermen in recent centuries? This is where the geology of the Baltic Sea gives a definitive answer. The wall is under 70 feet of water. We know from extensive research that the sea level in this region rose dramatically after the last ice age. The spot where the Blinkerwall now sits was last dry land more than 8,500 years ago. Around that time, meltwater from the colossal ice sheets covering North America and Scandinavia flooded the Baltic Sea basin. That one fact is the key to the whole mystery. Since the wall could only have been built on dry land, it must be older than 8,500 years. This instantly rules out any medieval or modern construction. This structure belongs to the Stone Age. By analyzing sediment cores taken nearby, scientists were able to narrow down the timeline even further, suggesting a construction date of around 11,000 years ago. Let that sink in. This wall was built roughly 11,000 years ago. That's more than twice as old as the Great Pyramid of Giza. It predates Stonehenge by some 6,000 years. It was built by people who had no metal tools, no wheels, and no writing. The discovery of the Blinkerwall was the discovery of what is quite possibly the oldest known man-made megastructure in all of Europe. The sheer scale of it is staggering. A wall nearly a kilometer long, made of almost 1,700 stones. Even if the builders cleverly used the giant boulders already deposited by glaciers as anchors, the act of gathering and placing the 1,400 smaller stones represents a colossal undertaking for a small hunter-gatherer society. So, the puzzle pieces were starting to fit. A massive, man-made wall, over 10,000 years old, built on what was then dry land next to an ancient lake, swallowed by the rising seas and hidden for millennia. The what and the when were becoming clear, but the biggest question remained: why? Why on earth would a tiny population of Stone Age people invest so much time and energy into building this thing? The answer lies not in the wall itself, but in the world it was built to command. To understand the purpose of the Blinkerwall, we have to peel back 11,000 years of history and imagine a world that is almost alien to us. The Europe of that time wasn't the landscape of dense forests we know today. It was a land just waking up from the iron grip of the last ice age. The great ice sheet that had buried much of northern Europe had retreated, but its influence was everywhere.
The land where the wall was built was a vast, windswept, post-glacial tundra. Think of a subarctic environment, colder, with harsher seasons. The vegetation was sparse, mostly hardy birches, pines, and grasses clinging to a thin soil still recovering from the weight of the ice. This was a challenging world, and in this world lived a small, scattered population of humans. These were Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, our direct ancestors. And we have to get rid of the stereotypical image of primitive, grunting cavemen. These were modern humans, Homo sapiens, just like us. Their brains were just as capable, their social lives just as complex. They didn't have our technology, but they had an incredibly deep and intricate knowledge of their natural world. They had to. Their survival depended on it. And their numbers were tiny. Some experts estimate that at the time the wall was built, the entire human population of Northern Europe was likely less than 5,000 people. 5,000 individuals scattered across an area that today holds hundreds of millions. Society was organized into small, mobile bands of a few dozen people, likely extended family groups. For these small groups, the primary challenge was getting enough food to survive the long, brutal winters. And on these post-glacial plains, one resource was more important than any other: the Eurasian reindeer. The reindeer was the lifeblood of these people. It was so much more than just meat. Its hide provided warm clothing and shelter. Its bones and antlers were like a natural plastic, carved into needles, spear points, and harpoon heads. Its sinews were used for cordage and bowstrings. Every single part of the animal was used. A successful reindeer hunt didn't just mean a full belly. It meant tools, clothing, and shelter for months. It meant survival. But hunting reindeer in huge herds is a problem. Unlike solitary animals, reindeer are migratory, moving in massive groups, sometimes thousands strong. For a small band of hunters with spears and bows, confronting a single reindeer was dangerous enough. Trying to take on a stampeding herd was impossible. The key to hunting them, therefore, was not confrontation, but prediction and manipulation. These hunters would have studied the reindeer for generations. They knew their migration routes, their behaviors, and where they would pass through valleys or cross rivers. Their entire year would have been synchronized with the great reindeer migrations. This brings us to the problem the Blinkerwall was built to solve. How can a small group of people, with simple weapons, effectively and safely hunt a massive, moving herd of animals that represents their single most important resource? You can't overpower the herd. You can't outrun it. You have to outthink it. You have to use the landscape itself as a weapon. And if the landscape doesn't give you the perfect feature you need, you build it yourself. The Blinkerwall wasn't a wall in our modern sense. It wasn't a defensive fortification or an enclosure. It was a piece of sophisticated hunting architecture. It was a tool, designed with a deep understanding of animal psychology to turn the landscape into a massive, passive trap. The most plausible interpretation is that it served as a driving lane, a colossal funnel designed to guide the movement of migrating reindeer herds. The genius of the Blinkerwall is its location. The builders chose their spot with incredible care. The wall runs right alongside what was, 11,000 years ago, the shoreline of a large lake or bog. So on one side, you have the natural barrier of the water. On the other, you have this new, man-made barrier, the nearly kilometer-long line of stones. The hunters had created an artificial bottleneck. Now, consider the wall's height. At just 3 feet or less, it doesn't seem that impressive. A reindeer could easily jump it. But that misses the point. The wall wasn't meant to be an insurmountable obstacle. It was meant to be a guide. Herd animals will instinctively follow the path of least resistance. They prefer to move alongside a linear feature, like a cliff edge, a riverbank, or a low wall, rather than try to cross it. The Blinkerwall created a psychological barrier, not just a physical one. The hunt itself would have been a masterpiece of coordinated planning. As the herd approached, Hunters would have gently guided them towards the wide opening of their trap. Once the lead animals entered the channel between the lake and the Blinkerwall, the entire herd would follow. The hunter's job was to apply just enough pressure from behind to keep the animals moving forward down the funnel. The kilometer-long wall prevented the herd from scattering to one side, while the lake blocked them on the other. They were contained. As they were driven down this narrowing corridor, the animals would become more and more compressed, and panic would begin to set in. At the end of the wall, there would be a kill zone. One possibility is that the wall guided the animals directly into the lake. Reindeer are good swimmers, but in the water, they're slower and more vulnerable, making them easy targets for hunters waiting in small boats or along the shore with spears.
Another possibility is that the wall ended at an ambush point, maybe a man-made enclosure now buried under sediment, or a natural bog where the animals would get stuck. There, another group of hunters would be waiting to dispatch the trapped animals. This method of hunting is a sign of incredible ingenuity, but it's not entirely unique. Archaeologists have found similar large-scale hunting structures in other parts of the world. In the Middle East, there are massive stone desert kites used to funnel gazelle into a killing pit. And, in an amazing parallel, a 9,000-year-old caribou hunting drive lane has been found submerged beneath Lake Huron in North America. The existence of these structures across continents shows that large-scale landscape modification for hunting was a recurring and highly successful strategy for our ancient ancestors. The Blinkerwall represents a shift from opportunistic hunting to logistical harvesting. This wasn't about killing one animal for dinner. This was a communal effort designed to procure a massive surplus of food and materials. A single successful hunt could have provided enough resources to sustain the entire community through the brutal winter. It was an engineering solution to the problem of existence. The Blinkerwall is more than just a clever hunting trap. It's a monument that shatters our long-held stereotypes about Stone Age hunter-gatherers. For a long time, the popular view was that these people were simple, nomadic wanderers, living hand-to-mouth, constantly on the move. But the Blinkerwall paints a very different picture. It speaks of planning, cooperation, and a level of social organization we're only just beginning to appreciate. Think about the planning that went into this. It wasn't an impulsive project. It required long-term, multi-generational knowledge of the environment. The builders had to know the precise migration routes of the reindeer. They had to survey the land to find the perfect spot that combined a natural barrier like a lake with a landscape that could be modified. They had to conceptualize the design, understanding how a low wall could manipulate the behavior of an entire herd. This is abstract, forward-thinking, and strategic thought of the highest order. Then there's the labor. Building a kilometer-long wall by moving and placing all those stones is not a task for a single family. It would have required the coordinated effort of multiple bands or clans, all agreeing to work together on this massive communal project. This implies a complex social structure, with leaders to organize the labor and a shared belief that this long-term investment would pay off for everyone. This discovery suggests that these Mesolithic groups weren't just aimless nomads. The Blinkerwall is a massive, immobile investment in a specific territory. It implies a sense of ownership, or at the very least, a recurring claim to this particular part of the landscape. It suggests that groups would return to the same key locations year after year to hunt, fish, and gather. This structure was a permanent fixture in their world, an infrastructure used by generation after generation. The Blinkerwall forces us to see these early hunter-gatherers as active agents who shaped their environment. They didn't just live in the landscape, they engineered it. They modified it on a grand scale to suit their needs, demonstrating a level of foresight that predates the agricultural revolution by thousands of years. Long before the first farmers plowed a field, these hunters were already altering the world around them to secure their future. This structure, hidden for 8,500 years,
is a silent rebuke to the idea of the primitive Stone Age. It shows us that the capacity for large-scale cooperation, complex planning, and monumental construction is a deep part of the human story. The builders of the Blinkerwall may not have left behind written words or golden treasures, but they left this, a kilometer of stone that speaks volumes about their intelligence, their community, and their profound ability to thrive in a challenging world. In the cold depths of the Baltic Sea, the story of the Blinkerwall has been waiting. For over 8 millennia, it lay in silence, a secret kept by the rising waters. What was found by accident in 2021 has turned out to be one of the most important archaeological discoveries in Europe. An 11,000-year-old stone wall, almost a kilometer long, wasn't a fortress or a settlement. It was something far more clever, a highly sophisticated megatrap built by a small community of Stone Age hunter-gatherers to master the hunt.
The Blinkerwall is a monument to a forgotten chapter of human history. It tells a story of incredible ingenuity, of a people who possessed a masterful understanding of the natural world. It speaks of a complex, cooperative society capable of executing massive engineering projects long before the dawn of agriculture. It shatters the outdated image of our Stone Age ancestors and reveals them as they truly were: intelligent, adaptable, and capable of modifying their world on a grand scale to secure their survival. This wall is one of the oldest known examples of human hunting architecture on Earth, and potentially the largest Stone Age structure in Europe. It's powerful proof that the drive to innovate, cooperate, and build is one of the most ancient aspects of our species. The discovery also opens a tantalizing new frontier. Vast landscapes that were once home to our ancestors now lie submerged beneath the sea. The Blinkerwall is likely not the only secret these waters hold. What other monumental achievements are waiting to be rediscovered on the floor of the sea? The story of our deep past is still being written. The ingenuity on display here is simply breathtaking. An 11,000-year-old society with a population smaller than a modern village, building on a scale that rivals ancient civilizations. These discoveries are constantly changing our understanding of the deep past and revealing the incredible sophistication of our ancestors. If you find these stories of ancient mysteries and human ingenuity as fascinating as we do, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. We have so many more secrets from our past to uncover together, and you won't want to miss what we find next.